right, it says we are live. We're going to change our chat settings. We'll do that later. And let's take a look here. All right. Okay, it can hear me. Can you test it to make sure it can hear you?
Check. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for it
Oh,
to
okay,
catch up.
cool.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Everything working. That's fantastic. I
Beautiful.
love technology. Okay. All right. Hey folks, if you haven't been keeping up with the internet as of late, good for you. Um, but there's been a little bit of fandom drama, a bit of disagreement, discourse, all of that business, and we're not really going to get super deep into the specifics of that, I imagine, because neither of us are the people directly related to that. But nonetheless, I'm here with Rewatch Ryan. He's linked in the description here if you want to check him out. And we're going to talk about fandom, whether or not it can be saved, whether it's a lost cause maybe, but just in general, I'm hoping to have kind of a good chat about that. Seemingly we come from different perspectives, which is cool. That's, it's one of the reasons why we're here. But with that, give you a chance to introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and we'll move from there.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't know who I am, that's perfectly fine. I've always come off like a random dude on the internet speaking about such things that interest me, like fandom, and we're going to get into that more for sure. But yeah, I am Rewatch Ryan. My YouTube channel is in front of my face, I think, and on the stream. So thank you for showing that. But I have been dabbling in content creation for almost 10 years. 10-year anniversary is next month, and some of it's been independent. Some of it has been with outlets like Collider and Schmoes Know. Off and on, like everybody else, I took a little bit of a break from doing so during the pandemic and things like that. And now I'm just finding my way back. So I guess that's the most possible or bridge version I can give you on who I am.
All right. Yeah, that sounds all good to me. So with that, I want to give you a chance if there are any particular topics that you're wanting to bring up. Give you a chance to bring that up, or if you want it to just come up naturally. Otherwise, we can launch into kind of my line of questioning or line of discussion. But
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me. The way that you and I met, if you can call it met, we've been talking online, but the
mm-hmm.
the way that we've come together is certainly unique. So I am mostly just excited to talk about whatever you want to talk about. So I'm game for whatever you have prepped.
All right, yeah, that sounds good. So one of the things that I've noticed in taking a little bit of time to familiarize myself with your content and some of the stuff that you talk about is first of all, there's a few very particular like movies and pieces of media that we both seem to like at a similar level, which was cool. Um, in
Can I hear
particular,
what those are?
well, the one thing that I noticed that I just like always love to hear about is Ex Machina, because that's like one of my favorite movies. So just hear you talk about
Mm.
that, and I was like, I feel you on on Alex Garland being kind of hit or miss there, but but I think that's definitely his best work, at least that I've seen. Although I don't know if you've seen 28 Days Later. He wrote that. He didn't direct it, but
Beautiful,
yeah,
beautiful movie.
also very good. So again, like adding more credence to the hit or miss theorem with Alex Garland. And also, Daredevil season 3 is probably like my favorite piece of comic book media like ever. I
Hell yeah,
just utterly in love with that whole show and everything. So I was like, hell yeah, all right. Um,
absolutely.
but one of the things that I've noticed is that you talk, at least a fair bit from what I've seen, about there being some difficulties in communication between kind of different sides of fandom, and I definitely think
Mm.
that's fair. Like that's definitely happening, but I struggle a little bit with dealing with pointing fingers at who's responsible or things like that, because at least from my impression, having been someone who kind of came into the online fandom space pretty open-minded. I used to be, I wouldn't say like a diehard fan or anything like that, but I used to be someone who liked and watched content from people like the Critical Drinker and whomever, and just slowly started to be pushed away from them as I realized, at least from what I can see, And I think there's kind of two things driving this, that there's not really much in the way of meaningful disagreement welcome over there in that sort of sphere. And I think that
Hmm.
that's related to two particular things. And this is I'll cut off after I list them. Give you a chance to kind of respond to that. Is dishonesty, what people refer to as the grift, which we can talk about, and just general like prejudice. In particular, I think it comes in the form of inherent suspicion of marginalized people, not necessarily like direct hate, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I will say that my ability to speak on a lot of these, it's very limited
Totally
because
fair.
I am sort of, I'm opening myself up to different types of content creators that honestly, I didn't even know who Nerdrotic was until a few months ago.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
even then, yeah, even then, his name was at a mention on another stream. Are you familiar with Robert Meyer Burnett?
Vaguely, I wanted to get a chance because I heard you mention him, and I wanted to get a little bit deeper into it, but had
Sure.
spent too much time at work today. But I understand he's someone who's been on like FNT and been in that sort of circuit there.
Well, I actually don't know what he's been on. I know that, and this might help sort of explain who I am and where I'm coming from to begin with. So if you don't mind, I'll just go back a little bit.
Absolutely.
But Robert Meyer Burnett was someone I became familiar with when I was working with Collider. And the late, great John Schnepp was the host and creator of Collider Heroes. Do you know that show?
I don't. Mm-mm.
Okay, so when Collider movie talk, or I'm sorry, when Collider Video was crushing the game and the leader of all things geek fandom and stuff online, John Schnepp was the host of a comic book superhero based talk panel show,
Mm-hmm.
and Robert Meyer Burnett was a guest on that. And what's funny is that that's how I actually know who Chris Gore is. So we're talking about 2015, 2016. We're talking about 8 years ago when this is like really in its prime. But John Schnepp was a great man and a great host and a great shepherd of all things creators, fandom, and he sadly passed away suddenly while working with Collider. But anyway, Robert Meyer Burnett was somebody I became familiar with there. I was a big fan of his throughout the years. He went independent. He started appearing on the John Campea show, which is probably what he's most known for now. He's been off for the last few months. But anyway, he has his own YouTube channel, and I watch his streams. I've just been a fan of this guy for years, and he was either answering. He probably answered somebody in the live chat or some kind of comment that took issue with his association with Nerdrotic and Critical Drinker. So within the last year, I've heard those names for the very first time. As far as knowing a lot about them, I've certainly got a lot of cliff notes in the past couple of weeks. I definitely think I can speak to my concerns and your concerns, whether I know a whole lot about these people or not. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands that I am admitting ignorance on a lot of it. And feel free if I say something that is out of bounds or I need clarification on, please feel free to make sure that I understand.
No, yeah,
But
absolutely. And I mean
yeah,
that was kind of one of the things that I think is worth talking about, because I think that one of the concerns that I have as, like, if I were to sit down with someone who's just, they watch Star Wars and they talk to their friends about it and that's it. They don't go on the internet, they don't whatever. And you were to introduce them to a bunch of these like different YouTube channels across this like broad spectrum. Okay, how do you introduce them to it? How do you explain to them why do I dislike this person? Why do I like this person? Whatever. Because I think a lot of that can kind of seem very silly if you're not like already into it. You're not already immediately familiar with those people. And I guess like the
right.
fundamental, like the concern that I have, or one of the concerns that I have, specifically related to the more like dishonesty angle, is that like I've spent a lot of time going through the content of, especially the Critical Drinker, because I think that, in my opinion, he's probably one of the more articulate people in that sphere. And it's just kind of wild watching how poorly he summarizes movies, like how much stuff he says that just is like flat out untrue about the events of the film. And usually it seems that that's done in a way that reinforces a political message. So he'll say something like, oh god, I just lost the really obvious example I had there. Shit. What did I write it down? Oh, actually, yeah. Really reasonable, I guess, example of it is if you have you seen the movie Midsummer?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, right. So that movie, how would you characterize the ending of that film? If you
I
remember,
haven't seen it since the theaters. I'm trying
fair.
to think. I remember the last shot of it being the iconic shot of her in the May Queen outfit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that when the camera's pulling back? Is that the very last shot?
Yeah, yeah.
How would I characterize it?
Like how would
It,
you?
it's hard to.
How do you feel that the filmmaker wanted you to feel about that moment?
You know what? I don't even know, to be honest.
Okay,
I,
no,
I
totally
haven't seen
fair.
it since the theater, but I feel like that's kind of how I step away from anything I watch from Ari Aster. Is I just feel everything or nothing all at once. That's hard for me to tell you right off the spot.
No, yeah, that's totally cool. I guess the reason that I mention it is having watched the film more recently and having watched it with several friends who came to the same basic conclusion that I did. I think it's pretty clear if you watch that movie that it's not a happy ending. Like you're not watching that and they're not like
Oh yeah.
yeah, right? Like it's clear that oh god, what's happening to this woman is fucking dark and
Everybody was confronted with a situation of, I think the movie's definitely supposed to look pretty. I mean, obviously, the idea that she's wearing a suit or an outfit of flowers, yeah, she's got tears running down her face.
mhm.
It's misery on all accounts, whether it looks idealistic or not to the people that live there.
Yeah, right. Okay, so cool. I think we come from a fairly like similar perspective there. When you watched the Critical Drinker review of that movie, he comes away with the conclusion that the film is trying to basically tell you that oh, her white boyfriend is bad and it's good that she killed him, and basically that the film is this like anti-male, anti-white I don't know what you would call it, like manifesto basically. Like that's the impression that he comes away with. And I see that in a lot of content from that guy where you watch it
Mm.
and it's like, okay, that's not what the movies do. Like that's not even close to what's happening there. And like I guess even like another similar example of that if you've seen Black Panther Wakanda Forever, same thing at the one of the opening scenes of that is the Queen of Wakanda yelling at the UN and he opens his review basically saying oh, of course she's yelling at white men because who else could she yell at? And it's like later in the film, she literally yells at a room of black people. So clearly, according to Black Panther Wakanda Forever, it's cool either way, you know? But when you selectively edit information in a film or manipulate the perspective of it, you can basically convince your followers that like every movie coming out these days is super anti-white, super anti-male, and like and after a certain point, it's like okay, you've got a list of 200 movies that all hate men, and it's like only 3 of them fit that actual that actual characteristic or that actual label. And so it becomes incredibly difficult to even like communicate with people like that because they're coming in with all of this baggage that's not really like fair or accurate. They didn't go and watch the movie, but now like I have to spend all this time like dismantling it and stuff. I get all these like smug remarks and stuff from people who demonstrably aren't paying attention and are just like parroting this guy's opinions. um I don't know, I guess like is that does it make sense like the concern that I'm having there?
What you're saying is, I mean, I follow your point for sure, but I guess I'm lost on your. Did you have a question?
Well, I guess like I'm wondering then how do we communicate across those boundaries? How does one
Okay.
how does one when they get that consistent pattern of behavior, whether it be talking directly to the critical drinker or talking about him or talking to his fans, like how do you respond to that without being like you're just a dumbass, like I don't know what to tell you, you know? That's what I struggle with is I'm like I feel like I have to be like really really nice to people who are demonstrably not paying attention and coming in here with all these like super disingenuous perspectives.
Um, I think that the word I noticed that you used when it came to responding to his reviews, dismantling, is interesting
Sure.
because I've become familiar with your channel. I've certainly have done some of this too. the idea that we sort of critique the critics or react to the reactors, things like that, that kind of stuff. It's all fair game,
Mm-hmm.
100%. I think that ultimately what should be done, and I don't mean to sound preachy, and I don't always even do what I'm about to say, but I think that it's up to us to just just give your own opinion on your review of something in the comment section. And I think we need to do more of trusting other people's opinions. And what I mean by that is another word that you used when it came to like Critical Drinker speaking on the opening of Wakanda Forever, convincing other people. I think that is somebody watching Critical Drinkers reviews of Wakanda Forever without seeing Wakanda Forever, hearing his points and saying, "Oh, brother, I knew I shouldn't have seen it." There's a woman yelling at a man. All this. Of course, there are people that are like that, but that's when I start to ask questions about: is it possible that most of the people that watch Critical Drinker are already going to agree with him no matter what? Are there a group of people that watch Critical Drinker because they don't take him seriously enough? They know he just likes to take a piss out of shit, and they watch him just because he's an entertaining person. Do people hate watch Critical Drinker? Um, so there's a lot of different types of people, and I think you should take comfort in not generalizing his fandom. So I know that because he's a popular YouTuber, and you see the amount of subscriber he has and the amount of people that watch his videos, it's easy to just assume that everybody is there for the exact same reason and thinking the exact same thing. So I think that's why people feel like they have to dismantle what's going on in the space. But at the end of the day, as content creators, you and I can do the same types of things if we wanted to. And what I mean by that is, I feel like, so for example, I put out these videos covering the Nerdrotic Twitter thread takedown thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people's comments to me, uh, and I appreciate this. It's what I strive towards, even though I'm not perfect. But a lot of people just said this is just a breath of fresh air. And even the fact that you and I had a cordial interaction leading up to this, it's like you and I breaking bread like this. I feel like it's unusual. Would you agree with that?
No, I definitely would agree with you on that. I will say one of the reasons that I think that kind of becomes true in my experience has been um, a little bit related to a double standard. I guess, like, okay, from my perspective, I'm someone who will talk to almost anybody in this sort of space, and try to
Right.
talk as cordially as possible, like regardless of whether I like them as a person and stuff. But I've had quite a few experiences with people in this sphere where they'll come out of the gate, they'll be insulting, they'll call me a Nazi, they'll whatever, and then I like say something mildly rude in response, and they're like, "Oh wow, you never mind, you're a jerk, won't talk to you," And so it's like I feel like that's kind of one of the other difficulties that I run into here is sincerely it's like the cry bully sort of mentality of we're on top, we're the smart ones, we can call you whatever the fuck we want, and then any sort of personal attack is cruel, hateful, whatever. I mean, you see that sort of in like some of the Jeremy Griggs content, Geeks and Gamers, where he'll come out the gate shit talking all of these different Hollywood writers and all these different people and stuff like that. But then Star Wars puts out a statement that says the racist attacks on Moses Ingram are bad, and he'll be like, these pieces of shit are attacking all the fans, and it's like one, no, they didn't, and two, like if you put yourself in this perpetual like I'm a victim mentality, but I'm going to treat everyone else as though they have a victim mentality, I think it becomes really difficult to communicate with people and to like have those conversations. I feel like I might not have made that exactly as clear as I meant to, but do you see what I'm getting at?
I understand completely what you're getting at, but the one thing that I would just make sure that we add to that is that everybody is guilty of that. So
True. Yeah.
you're always coming from your point of view. Absolutely. I'm always coming from my point of view. But you and I probably have shared experiences. I've talked about this recently. Depending on the day, I'm called woke lib or I'm called alt right. A lot of people that we're talking about get other labels thrown at them. It's the internet. It's all the
Mm.
cis, all the phobes, and it's starting to not matter what you call people anymore, and it's starting not to matter what you're called because we're not able to discern any of this stuff anymore,
And
and it's losing its weight. Um, you were about to say something. Go
well,
ahead.
yeah, I guess I sort of I see where you're coming from on part of that, but I also think that like from the like if you're coming from the perspective of say a gay kid who has seen a bunch of nerdrotic content and stuff has come away from it from the perspective that it's incredibly homophobic, which I think is something that we like I can do a fairly good job of justifying, at least partly. And then you see people out there like continuing to defend him. I can see why someone would start to feel like, okay, this person is legitimizing this behavior, even if that's not necessarily what they're trying to do. And I guess like it's one of those things. One of the comments that I've tried to make, something that I've tried to make clear on my channel, is that when I accuse a content creator, when I say a content creator is a racist or misogynistic or a homophobe or whatever, that those labels are not intrinsic and that they don't stick with a person for their entire life. So, for instance, when I say that Jeremy of Geeks and Gamers is transphobic because he saw news that there was going to be a trans person in X-Men and said, fuck this show, which I think is like a pretty clear example of prejudice, like immediately right out the gate, like that's a label that he can get rid of. That's a label that can be avoided. And I think that, to an extent, like 2016 YouTube sort of drilled in some people's minds that it's like once a racist, always a racist, or, you say one racist thing, then that's who you are fundamentally. And I don't think that that's true. But I also don't think it's fair to then disregard the label entirely. When like I think that there are examples of prejudiced behavior that I think are pretty explicit in a lot of these cases.
So here's what I would say to that. First of all, if I mean that's not obviously a good thing. If you have, let's say, a child who is a member of the LGBTQ community, they hear a homophobic joke made by Nerdrotic. Obviously, I don't want a child of mine that has that experience to have to go through any homophobic experience, let alone somebody who makes a homophobic joke on the internet. But because we're doing hypotheticals, we have to make sure that we think about everything.
Sure.
And I think you heard me speak about this a little bit, but basically, I'm going to say this a lot. Everything that we're talking about happens on both sides. I want to make sure that that's clear. But so let's say Nerdrotic says something homophobic. And there's a young person in America who's a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And here's that homophobic joke. So, this child is on YouTube every day. Is there going to be a difference in how that kid reacts to Nerdrotic's homophobic joke based on the fact that the next day he hears from another member of the LGBTQ plus community who actually loves Gary and makes content and just thinks that Gary's funny and loves his gay jokes, blah, 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 blah? Is there going to be a difference in how that kid reacts to Nerdrotic then based on the next day if he goes to a streamer or sees a Twitter thread that is taking down Nerdrotic for being homophobic? Maybe that kid has gay parents. And maybe that kid's parents make similar types of jokes all the time like that. But he sees on the internet that there's somebody else with a different viewpoint, that Gary is a homophobic and maybe he's also racist, and maybe he's also all these other things. He used to be in prison, do all this. Who's to say?
Are you saying like who's to say
I mean,
what perspective they're coming away with, or?
I'm saying if we play the hypothetical game, we have to play the hypothetical game. So it's just based on a lot of elements. But you have to make sure that when you play this game that, yes, I know that you want to make your point, but there could be a member of the LGBTQ plus community who likes Gary.
Sure.
And what if he thinks Gary's homophobic jokes are funny, and maybe they interact, and then maybe that person makes a YouTube video to counter the type of stuff that you and I have been doing. So I can just hypothetically soften the blow of what Gary does. So then there are other YouTubers who are offended and get upset. So again, my point is that you have the ability to get offended. You have the ability to get upset. But you also have to take accountability for the type of content you're putting out in the air, and just can't claim that I should be the video that this kid should watch and like and learn from when there are other viewpoints that exist. Am I making sense?
I think so. I guess what I'm sort of what I guess I want to push back a little bit on here. So I 100% agree and acknowledge the fact that like Gary has fans in all different communities and whatnot, right? They definitely exist. I imagine that statistically they would be underrepresented related to the rest of the population. But like, okay, would you agree that in the context of, and I don't know, humor is a little bit more esoteric, a little bit more complicated. So rather than even just talking about humor, just talking about like a comment in general, a racist comment or a homophobic comment, would you agree that in evaluating a comment someone made, like there is going to be a person who's correct about it and a person who's wrong about it? You know, if I come out here and I say I hate gay people, and someone says, well, that's not homophobic, and someone else says, well, that is homophobic, like one of those two people is correct, right?
Well, I wouldn't answer that without knowing the full context as to why the person
No, for
said I
sure, for
hate gay
sure.
people.
Yeah.
Like if you go on Twitter, I have gay friends that will laugh at a video or a meme of a gay person doing something, and then my gay friend will say, I hate gay people.
Mm-hmm.
He's obviously
I'll do that.
joking, and then we laugh together. So I need you to add more context so I can answer this.
So like context would be, you know, someone comes out and actually good example is a YouTuber you may or may not have heard of, Melanie Mack, who is unambiguously anti-gay, who said from that new you know how Joaquin Phoenix just like walked away from a movie that he'd been, you know, working on for years or whatever. Melanie Mack made a tweet where she was like, good, no more degenerate gay content, or one fewer degenerate gay movie. And we know, like, unambiguously, it is her religious belief that you can't be gay, that it's degenerate, that it's wrong, like, all of that stuff. So, like, looking at that, it's unambiguous that she's being homophobic there, right? Like, there's not really, like, someone who, like, a gay person who's trying to sanitize her would just be incorrect in defending that.
Taking you at your word, absolutely.
Yeah, take me at my word, obviously, if you don't, yeah. And so...
And what you said, yes.
And so I guess like in the context of a lot of this content, I agree that there are, you know, that there exist marginalized people who defend this sort of content, who agree with it. But I also think that, I mean, there are marginalized people that defend everything, right? You can find, if you've ever heard of Jesse Lee Peterson, he's a black man who will say racism never existed, that slavery wasn't racist, right? Like just, you know, most insane shit. Yeah, right. Obviously, like, he's kind of a fringe person and most people are not even remotely in that sphere, but like it's a possibility. And I think in the case of a lot of this content, usually the prejudice is fairly coded in a way that's really functions really obviously if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, but isn't as obvious if you're looking super close. I guess like an example of that, and the big thing that I always come back to with people in this sphere, whether it be geeks and gamers, whether it be nerdrotic, whether it be critical drinker, is that their content output fundamentally serves to make people inherently suspicious of marginalized people being in media. So a black person can be the lead of a show, but we immediately have to make sure that it's not woke, right? A white person being the lead is a default, whatever, we can live with that. But when there was a woman leading the Fallout show, they have to take time out of their video to say, and don't worry guys, she's not a girl boss in this one or whatever. And it's like, a man doesn't get that, right? That doesn't, a white guy doesn't experience that. And so then you see in the comments, there are some people that I've engaged with online and stuff that then take that logic and they run with it further, and they say, oh, well, by that logic, I guess the Last of Us is also woke and we should hate that too. And like they keep going. And the suspicion is not very well explained. It's not very well laid out. There's not a specific set of logical principles that you can use to evaluate whether media is woke or not. And so you're free to just run wild, and whatever thing that ticks off your woke sensor, like, cool, that's woke. So black guy leading a show, that's woke, whatever.
I think that there are, as much as disingenuous I feel that some studio heads and some studios are in terms of pandering to social politics and just responding to anything that goes on in the world. There's all kinds of stuff. There's the actress, and I don't know a lot about this. I know that there's outrage against the actress that will be appearing in Brave New World. That's something I have not looked much into, to be honest, but I know that it exists. So there's all kinds of things, whether decisions the studios make, studio heads make, that pander to one side or the other. It's always going to upset one side or the other. But as much as I think a lot of this is disingenuous and pandering, at the same time, there are certain critics who need to be able to let people of color and minorities, they have to be able to take jobs and play characters without getting that DEI excuse, right? Like, it just has to happen. So, but again, we got to make sure that we're talking about both sides. And I know that that's so lame that I'm making sure that we're being objective. But I think the reason why you're bringing some of this up is so that we can find common ground and pinpoint some of where this is. I agree with you. It is unfair for a great actor or actress of color or another minority group to play a role and not be accepted as anything other than a DEI hire. From what I've seen, and this isn't everybody, I'm not going to generalize. There are definitely going to be people who always do that. But at the same time, there's also criticism of it going on because I just think that there are showrunners, there are studio heads that make it apparent that is really what they're pushing and really what they care about. And it's really easy to identify that it is at the risk of a good story, at the risk of a bad story, I should say.
How does that work mechanistically, though? Because I hear that like fairly frequently, that like they're putting identity politics over story or whatever, and I've never right. gotten like a good explanation of it. Like, how physically does that work? Like, okay.
Well, I mean, when you have the press rollout of the Acolyte, not only is it the most recent one, but I think it's just the most inflammatory.
Sure. Yeah.
But when there's constantly a conversation about, like, I wanted to take my story and infuse it with Star Wars, you also have to consider the fact that this is already an inflammatory franchise. Like, there's already a lot wrong with Star Wars. I would argue that there's always been a little bit something wrong with Star Wars. I'm not precious about Star Wars like a lot of people are. I don't have issue with people that are, but I mean, I can find flaw in every Star Wars project ever made. So, but I mean, when it's already an inflammatory thing, and you're a fan, and let's say you remember seeing Star Wars growing up as a kid in theaters, and it always meant this to you, and you see it taken to another corporation, and they're deciding that I think it's pretty easy to understand how people can get upset seeing Star Wars change in front of their eyes. Like I reject the idea. It's hard for me to know how that feels, or maybe it's not. Like I feel like maybe there's a little bit of that with James Bond, a lot of these other legacy franchises with Star Trek. I mean, there are people that have existed on this planet long enough that remember it through the framework of what it meant to them in their childhood, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
We can argue if it's good or bad, if you age with something, and and you continue to hold it to that standard when it should be for other people as well along the way. We could have all kinds of those conversations, but I think that I've kind of lost my point a little bit, to be honest. I think
yeah.
Do you want to cherry pick off of anything?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm hearing you. So I definitely can sympathize with somebody who feels like the franchise that they've been super into all of this time is changing, and is changing in a way that maybe they don't necessarily like.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. We were talking about the inflammation of
Acolyte.
the Acolyte.
Yeah.
So anyway, when people are already stewing in that, and then they see something like the Acolyte after they've been like, please, Kathleen Kennedy, do this, this, and this. You haven't done this, this, and this up until this point. Hear me as a fan. This isn't Star Wars. This is blah, 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 blah. And then every new project is a new opportunity to go in a different direction. And I think we've seen that with Skeleton Crew. It's kind of almost like what that show doesn't have going for it is that it's the show post The Acolyte. But if we get a press junket that's all about like, hey, we wanted to make this Amblin style, we wanted to bring a youthfulness back to Star Wars, we can hear all the things that we can disagree or agree on. But if you're a fan who just has all these problems and wants their voice to be heard, and then you get a press junket like that, it's like, well, wait a minute. Why aren't we talking about the story? Why are we still hiring showrunners and directors and writers that don't know a whole lot about Star Wars, that aren't taking care of the story? Why aren't we getting a show that's focused on the High Republic? I think the biggest missed opportunity of that show, not to just spout my annoying opinions about film and television, but the reason why that show failed ultimately, in my opinion, is that it should have been a show that introduced the High Republic to audiences. That's it.
Okay.
It should have literally been as easy as, what does House of the Dragon look like for Star Wars? Does it have to have the mature rating? I'm talking about lore, world building, respecting previous canon, even cherry picking from Legends, all of those things, right? Because Star Wars, we're always going to have preconceived notions. And then you kind of just get what you get with the press junket, and then you have actors coming out against fandom, and you have showrunners bringing their lifestyle and agenda into things. It's like, there are people that are going to say, why isn't this about Star Wars? Okay. Why isn't this about the story?
I think I've got a couple things I might want to push back on there. Sorry, I'm just like lots of stuff happening. When it comes to the showrunner and the them not talking about story, I guess I want to know where that's happening, because what I hear that a lot. I hear that coming from a lot of these people. I hear, they only talk about identity politics. They don't talk about story. They don't, whatever. And when I actually go and look up the actual interviews, I see that's not actually true. Like, they actually do that. But if you cut a 45-second clip out where they're talking about identity and then pretend like that's all they talked about, like, yeah, okay, it does seem that way. But it's like, whether you like or dislike Leslie Headland, it is very clear that woman is fucking obsessed with Star Wars. Like, even if you think that the show she made is bad, or you think she's a bad person or whatever, like, there were so many interviews where that was like the big thing. She was just talking about all of these different ideas she had for Star Wars. The actors are like, oh my god, she's thinking about Star Wars all the time. Like, it does happen, but if we ignore all of the times that it does happen, then it creates this perception that it doesn't. And that's kind of part of the struggle. Is like, I can see where it would seem like from the outside, oh, why aren't they talking about story? But it's like, they are. We just people on the internet don't get mad when they talk about story, so you don't hear about it unless you go and search for it yourself.
Yeah, I think that we're on two different paths. I'm more so just speaking objectively. Here's how someone can receive this or that.
Sure.
I mean, you can't control what people take away from certain things. My ultimate point is that it's just not hard for me to understand why someone can pick that out. But I think what you're interested in doing, and if this is the conversation we're having, then that's fine. But what you're interested in doing is, it comes off like you feel like you have to expel more energy because these opinions exist to counteract because this person said this on a podcast. Like, is it not just enough to say your opinion on the thing and then move on?
I think to an extent it's kind of necessary, just because of the fact that, well, okay, for a few things,
I don't see it as, and this isn't a critique of like the type of content you make by any means, because that would be silly. But it just, I don't feel like I'm fighting a war, because sure. I think that it's important to, be genuine, and I think it's important to voice your opinion. Putting it out into the world is a beautiful thing. The way that we're able to do it. Are you American?
Yes.
Not that it really matters. I was just curious.
Yeah, I am.
Just so we're on the same. But like the way that we're able to do it, it's a beautiful thing. But when I make content, I don't necessarily feel like I'm going to war with anybody, because I don't know if it's because I don't hold my opinion in that high of regard, but at the same time, it's like, I'm only going to put so much energy into something. Ryan, you made 4 videos on Nerdrotic. Yeah, but I feel like it was pretty objectionable, and I was just reasonably adding to discussion. But it's like, I don't think if I didn't make those videos that Grayson would win more. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, I'm not, like, am I challenging what's going on when it comes to take down Twitter threads, and like, what does that mean for the culture, and how does it contribute to conversations, things like that. But at the end of the day, I don't think that by not making my video, he wins more.
Yeah, okay, I agree. I don't think it's a war necessarily, but so first of all, I guess I want to know, like, do you hold that same standard when you're talking about these, like, Star Wars fans who are, upset about the direction their franchise is going, and post, long videos talking about how much they hate Kathleen Kennedy or whomever, like, feel like they're going to war with her, like, or with Disney Star Wars in general? Like, does that fall under the same general category, or is that some unique category of content?
Do I take issue with people that make videos about Kathleen Kennedy?
Do you take issue with the attitude of, like, oh, we're going to war with Lucasfilm or whatever? Obviously not using that exact terminology, but I don't either.
I think that's interesting. So if I could take a second to say, I think you wanted to hop on this call and talk about how fandom can come together. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah, I'm looking for, like, ways to communicate with these, and I'm trying to, like, bounce it off of some, I'm not, like, trying to destroy anybody or whatever, but
absolutely. I would love to sort of start talking about that as well and answer your current question. And I think one thing that I've stumbled upon recently, and it's not an amazing opinion by any means, but I feel like we don't fix fandom by changing what the other person is thinking. That is a lost cause, and we will exhaust ourselves, turn to hate, turn to anger towards each other, and it's not productive in the least. If we zoom out and look at how we fix fandom, I it's just about sticking together. That's all it is.
But I
So
guess
it's
like
not about
how
hold
does
on. So it's not about changing each other's opinions. It's about accepting each other's opinions. And then to bring it back to the question that you asked me is I think about are you a House of the Dragon
no, I'm not,
viewer?
unfortunately.
Well, I want to speak to something, and if you watch House of the Dragon, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I'm not going to spoil it. It's a pretty straightforward. So I'm not going to spoil it, just to make
Sure.
sure everybody's cool. So episode 3 of season 2, so like a month or two ago, this came out. There's a scene at the beginning of it's a cold open on two feuding families. So it's not it's I'm trying to what house is it? I've got it right in front of me. I don't know why I'm not looking. It's not either of the two main houses. So we have two houses, Bracken and Blackwood, that are just Westerosi families. All right, they're not the royal families or anything, but there's obviously a war going on between Team Green and Team Black, and I'll leave it at that because the promotion is that vague.
Sure.
So the plot synopsis of the scene is a small territorial dispute between longtime enemies, Houses Bracken and Blackwood, who support Aegon and Rhaenyra, respectively, escalates into a deadly battle resulting in ruination and many casualties. Okay? So, this scene, I watched it for the first time a few days ago because I'm catching up, right? And I watched this scene and I said, oh, that's fandom. That's what fandom is. And not only is it what fandom is, at the risk of getting political, that's what America is right now. We have people who go to war and bicker. Sometimes they fight arguments and feuds that span years and decades, and they result in maybe even violence. But let's keep it at they
Sure.
resulted a lot of people just being angry and bitter towards each other online, and we've lost understanding and empathy for the fellow man. So what happens in the scene is that houses Bracken and Blackwood, in the name of whatever their houses, in the name of whatever their houses stood for, before these people even existed, in the name of families in the capital that are just fighting for glory and power in the kingdom, they turn to violence and end each other. Now, do I mean to go that far? No. But to keep with my metaphor here, and to finally circle back to what you said, you and I, if we have a disagreement about the Acolyte, we have our opinions, sure, but it all comes from a bunch of shit that we don't know about behind the scenes that we actually probably don't need to concern ourselves with. When you see the scene that I just described in season 2, episode 3, you've seen 12 episodes of House of the Dragon before that, right?
Sure.
So imagine seeing every single little thing that happened in a Hollywood studio that led to the creation of the Acolyte. It would probably change your mind in how you feel about that show. But these people that are fighting this territorial dispute, these people that are fighting for, king this and queen that, they have no idea that as an audience, we've seen 12 episodes where those people are just as full of shit and not deserving at all of the power that they crave. They manipulate each other, they deal in deceit. selfishness, lack of empathy, violence as well to do all of these things. And I'm just like, that's what fandom is. And so you ask me about Lucasfilm and Disney. I feel like corporations that make our product, I think that's where our energy should go. And I don't mean to say that it should be about violence. I'm not condoning violence.
Yeah.
What I'm speaking to is you and I, whether we agree or disagree, can just accept each other's opinions. But I would never. We should always say we should always hold corporations or Hollywood studios to the standard if we're the customer to give us the best product possible.
Sure.
I know that that was a very long-winded answer.
No, yeah. So
I think that's zooming out and fixing fandom for me.
So I definitely feel you in terms of the, focusing large amounts of attention needing to be focused on the corporations behind any of this content, both for production reasons, also for ethical reasons. I like Disney is a mega corporation, doesn't give a shit about any of us. Like, it's all about getting money. The whole communist spiel over here. But I mean, I guess the problem that I run into here is that when we come down to like just accepting other people's opinions, there is only so far that can go. Like, there's only so much you can accept a person's opinion when their opinion is, there's just like too many of you people in this media, right? There are too many gay people in movies these days or whatever. Like, that's the problem that I run into, is that like when I don't want my sister or my daughter to be coming into this fandom space and being like, okay, primed beforehand, look, they don't have the greatest views of women being in movies. They don't love that, but you just got to deal with it.
Every time you bring in these hypotheticals, I don't know how to react to them necessarily, because like it would be helpful if we were like talking about a specific person in a specific video. Like I just don't know how exactly to respond to things that you're pulling out like that.
Sure, I can give specifics.
Is it could be coming through your framework. Like, what if you show me a video of somebody saying something, but I just take it as a joke? Not to say that you aren't offended or anything, but it's like it's just hard for me to like navigate when you're just speaking in hypotheticals.
So I can give a specific example. I assume you're familiar with the concept in media of a quote like girl boss, right?
Sure.
Okay, and like, would you generally agree, according to people in the more like anti-woke whatever sphere, girl boss is a woman who's generally speaking good at almost everything, who's treated as basically morally perfect within reason, and who doesn't really need to grow throughout the story. Like, generally their arc revolves around coming to accept themselves rather than like becoming a better person or something like that. Like, that's
I feel like that's that's a good explanation, or how I would understand is what somebody's talking about when they say that.
Similar, like, used to be Mary Sue, whatever. When I watched the content of at least 3 of these people, so Ryan Kinnell, Nerdrotic, and The Critical Drinker, all 3 of them in their reviews of the show Echo referred to the character as a girl boss, which I think you've seen that show, I think is a very disingenuous characterization of what happens in that show, right? She's a villain for a large portion of it, is told explicitly by characters in her family in a way that's framed positively by the narrative that she's doing bad things and needs to change as a person. Like, whether or not you like that show, the only thing making that character a girl boss is that she's a woman. And so I think anyone watching that who is like familiar with the content that's being reviewed is basically coming away with one of 2 very broad perceptions. Either, oh, these guys just see any woman as a girl boss, or, oh, I guess she's a girl boss. And so like, how does one engage with that? If these words don't have meaning, you can just basically use the, girl boss is obviously treated as a negative term. If you can just say, okay, this is a woman, boom, assign a negative term, doesn't need to make sense. We've done, our work is done,
So what? All right, let's say that You said it was Ryan Kennel that said that?
Yeah. And Nerdrotic and
Okay.
Critical Drinker, but yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So what do you want done about it? Because there's nothing stopping from you from just commenting your thoughts and feelings in that comment section and just stating how you feel about it. But like, what else is there to do?
I mean, like, fundamentally, I think that it's one of those things that if people who just don't need to be like leftist commies or whatever, but like if people who recognize that for what it is all like start to conglomerate around whether it be people or ideas that recognize that recognize, hey, that's just showing demonstrable prejudice against women, there's not really any reading between the lines there.
Hmm.
Like we can basically like we can start to make that sort of content less popular, we can make it less rewarding. I'm not necessarily like I'm not advocating for obviously anything bad to happen to anyone. I think that's like fucked up whenever people do that, not cool. And I mean, to an extent, like there are times and places where it's like, okay, you can um uh lose advertiser revenue or whatever, and I think that there are, that's kind of down to the advertisers, but broadly I'm like, okay, we as fans of this media, whether we like it or not, and I think Echo for me was like a 6.5 out of 10 show, like definitely not a masterpiece, definitely could have been better, want it to be better, we can come together and agree on that and have those conversations. I can come and chat with somebody who is in love with the movie The Rise of Skywalker, even though that's my least favorite movie I've ever seen in my life. Like, we can have those conversations and those disagreements, but like, we should make the kind of content that a lot of these people make, or at least some of the specific elements of that content, unpopular, so it's not rewarding to them to keep making it.
Yeah, I think maybe with acceptance comes. I think one fundamental difference, and we can just decide where we're at with this, but one fundamental difference between me and you. Do you mind if I ask how old you are?
Yeah, 22.
Okay, first of all, I promise you, nothing makes me feel older than when I have to ask people how old they are. So I don't like that I did that, but um, I think one fundamental difference between us is that I want to see everybody be unbothered by what everybody else thinks. So I don't know. I mean, sometimes if stuff like that is said, it's not that I don't care about hateful speech. It's that I take comfort in the fact that there are people who can just watch that video that don't do what you're suggesting. Um, that like, what if we all just stopped giving weight to what everybody else said and we could just take the content at entertainment value? It would actually probably be easier to sift through the problematic people more. But this goes back to the idea that we are so interested and have no empathy. We're so interested, and I mean this. We're interested in being angry at each other that it's become indiscernible. So I think that in the current climate that we're at, you're you're fighting a losing battle. Um, that's not even personal. It's like, what if I decided to spend all of my time trying to take down a bunch of creators that I disagree with? I mean, I would ultimately just walk away and be like, what am I doing? Because, I mean, how do you feel about
Well, I
that?
guess I think, okay, if you're dedicating like your entire life or your entire online presence or whatever to stuff like that, I think it's definitely, it gets unhealthy very very quickly and is broadly not good for you. I think I like as myself, as someone whose most popular content is just like analysis of the show Invincible, as someone who
Right.
like wrote my own book and every like is doing my own thing, I think it's worthwhile as a person engaging with fandom to do my best to keep keep people from legitimizing that behavior. And I think a really good like example of why I think it's important is if you're familiar with the Twitter account End Wokeness. It's run by I should say it's allegedly run by a guy named Jack Posobiec, who's an undeniable extremist, just a wild guy on the political spectrum. Whatever, takes a lot of this fandom stuff and converts it into political right wing propaganda, basically. An example he did with Echo was posted. It was like, this is Marvel's new Girlboss superhero. She's Native American, she's disabled, and she's deaf, right? And basically, like, that was the whole tweet, was literally just listing off the demographics. This is Marvel these days. And that translates into behavior, both in the context of voting, in the context of online harassment. If you saw like some of the stuff that people were saying in response to Grayson, obviously some of it was like legitimate disagreement, but you also had people saying like, "Oh, bet you this is a Jew," or "Oh, no surprise, a gay person saying this." Like,
those are the accounts that speak to angry people.
Right, but I think that it's
so instead of expelling energy on content creators or changing other people's opinions, because we're never going to solve this. What you're describing, certain creators online creating a content riles up other people. This person feels like they have to counteract. They rile up the other side. The only way to cut the head off the snake is to look inward, is to start with, why do I feel compelled to thumbs up or thumbs down a video? Why can't I just take in a video, think about it, pontificate on it, and then go about my day? Why do I feel like I have to comment when I could just shut my laptop? You talk about zoom out. I mean, we could zoom out all the way back to just, we could talk human nature. We could talk about history. We could talk about the political landscape. But it's like, at the end of the day, I remember a time. I'm 33, just to clarify.
Sure.
I say that because I'm not old. I just feel old sometimes.
Sure.
But I remember a time before I even knew what like gender politics were, right? That's a very inflammatory conversation, has everybody up in arms all the time. I remember a time when I didn't even know like a lot of what we're talking about now. And, but I say that not because I'm making a point like it was better. I feel like we're at an all-time, like, we can't stand each other over a lot of this stuff. And I think it has to just do with the fact that we just are not checking our emotions. It's not to say that we can't think differently. It's not to say that we can't make change, and we can, but I question, does it ever change unless we do? Like, how productive are we being if someone like you, the way that you described, feels like that they have to counteract and dismantle another? Like, that's not the way, because then somebody's going to want to do that to you, and then someone's going to want to do that to that person, and then you're long gone.
But I mean, that's
we're out of control.
That's where I think it's important to specify, like, one, the type of engagement that we're doing, because in general, for the most part, I don't think that I do stuff that's like exceedingly emotionally charged. But more importantly, like, just honesty and accuracy and reporting and whatnot. Like, I think that's an important thing, that if somebody comes out here and they say something that's untrue, I don't necessarily think that everybody's obligated to say something about it, but I think if anybody sees something that's false and they make the decision to publicly post information correcting that falsehood, I think they're doing a good thing. And there are obviously, like, there are ways you can do that badly, there are ways that you can do that well, but, like, I don't think that you could make the exact same I don't think you could make the exact same kind of content responding to something that I or someone I agree with makes, that you could in making a response to, say, like, Ryan Kinnell or whomever, in that, like, okay, you watch a Ryan Kinnell, Nerdrotic, like, whomever video, and most of their content isn't really making arguments, it's just kind of like stating stuff as fact. And some of them make argumented content. I'm not saying that necessarily, and I think that there's actually better ways to respond to that stuff. But like then, okay, someone comes along and they make a response, making arguments and explaining why these facts are incorrect, why you as a person who maybe hasn't engaged with this media is watching this, coming away with a piece of false information, can better your perspective or improve it. I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing to do, and I don't think it has to be this super hateful, rage-filled, like, you know, whatever. I think, you know, the last time that I remember getting angry on my YouTube channel was literally just in a piece of journalism where Ben Shapiro flat out falsified information, and like it in a way that was going to endanger a child or potentially endanger a child. But like short of that, I think I just like, I watch a Critical Drinker video and, you know, you get a little bit animated to like be entertaining, but I'm like, all right, he says this is wrong because of all of these different reasons. And I think that that's like, one, I think that's healthy. I think that's good discourse to have. And two, I think it doesn't contribute in the same way. I don't think it's necessarily two sides of the same coin. And I'm sure that there are anti-woke people who, to an extent, do the same kind of thing. And obviously then I would just disagree with them on facts and not their approach. But I don't know. I don't think that you have to put out like hate or anger into the world to try and depopularize hateful and angry content.
No, I agree. There's speaking with reason and objectivity, for sure. I mean, that's something that I inspire to do. Whatever idea or opinion or perspective I come across, I want to try and do it and even if I don't have all the facts. I mean, I feel like what I'm obligated to do is just explain to people that I don't have the facts. You know, it's like when you do a movie review. Like, I always think it's important to take the time to explain how I arrived at seeing this film. You know, so whether it's I didn't read the book first, I did it on purpose, I saw this movie when I was a kid, but I don't remember it, and I did a like, you know, all that stuff that we do when we talk about movies. I always love to explain to the person how I arrived at my conclusion. And they can form their opinion based off that. When I make the videos that are shown on the screen right now, here's how I arrived at this conclusion. I think this way about takedown threads. I don't know this much about this person. I don't know this much about this person. It's like, I just think that's important to do. But I feel like that's all that we're, at the end of the day, obligated to do. Is here's what I got for you. Here's my takeaway from it. And we can certainly bounce ideas back and forth. But I think that you are mistaken if you keep the attitude that all of your arguments are bulletproof and the ones that you're contesting are not.
So, okay,
and
yeah.
What I mean by that is, and make sure I'm clear on this, but to sort of speak on what you just said, you don't see how it's wrong to make the content that you are making because you're challenging the other person, correct? Is that,
well, I think
to expand on that more?
The reason that I have is, one, I don't think it's especially inflammatory in that, like, when I make fairly clear when I assign labels exactly what I mean, so I'm not so that, like, if I'm being inflammatory, if I'm really, like, telling you that this person is a gigantic piece of shit, like, you can tell, like, I mean, you know. And two, because I sit there and I make, like, arguments, I go through, I double check stuff, like, all of those things that these people either don't do or do and then misrepresent, right? Like, there's not really any other option in some of those cases. Like, one thing that I respected that you did when you were looking at the Acolyte reviews being taken down on right, where they weren't showing up on there, is like, right, going in there and just checking, right? And there were a lot of people, I don't know the specific videos that were made on it, but I saw a lot of that engagement online where people just go and they blindly parrot that and they're like, oh, look, they're hiding, it's a conspiracy, whatever. And one thing, like, I actually that I saw, because I, you know, you talked about like being put in a Twitter post or whatever, I actually think that you using a thumbnail like that was probably a good thing overall, because then somebody who's expecting to be angry about it comes in here and then gets a less, like, just a, hey, let's take a step back and actually take a look at this, you know? But I think that was a good, like, that's a good thing to do. And I think if you see,
But your mistake is assuming that that person you aren't reacting to doesn't feel the same way about their content. So if Ryan Kennel is talking about what's the thing that literally just happened? Like if Ryan Kennel is talking about like what a disaster Snow White's gonna be, right? He is saying that thinking there's no way to dispute it because here are the facts, right? They recasted this person, they brought out this person, they're only focused on this, these agendas, blah 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 blah. He thinks that there is no disputing that. He's speaking against corporations. It doesn't mean that he's not guilty of, saying hateful things to other people or lashing out at other people as well. But if it's safe to say that he's starting from a place of criticizing the corporation, he also thinks he has the bulletproof argument and that he's looking at all of these things that bring it all together into one. So I just think it's a mistake if all of us are just constantly that self-righteousness and that self-importance of like I have to get in there and do this. Again, those are the circles that don't solve fandom or what we're here to discuss. It just I appreciate what you're saying, but it just kind of just goes back to my point that it starts with how we react to each other and how we talk to each other.
I guess the concern that I start to run into there then is that, like, okay, yeah, anyone can say that they're doing the right thing and not doing the bad thing, but I think that, like, you then have to just take a look at the actual truth of the matter. And it's possible someone thinks I'm wrong. I'm not about my own stuff. Like, I am open to criticism. There are a few specific videos where I definitely think that I've fucked up in, my addressing of a particular issue. But, like, it remains the case that, like, if you're at you're at a fandom convention and y'all are hanging out, having a good time. This is kind of based off of a comment that I got a little bit earlier, or a chat message a little bit earlier from username Harlan Littlejohn, is that, like, if you're in a convention center and you've got, a panel run by a woman, let's say, and there's a bunch of guys out there loudly talking about, like, oh, of course there's a goddamn woman running this whole thing, and going off about how it's, it's wokeness, it's whatever, and then other people who are saying, oh god, those guys are assholes, both of them could make the claim that they're the ones being objective and rational, but, like, only one of them is correct. And after a certain point, you say, okay, if you guys are gonna keep acting like that, you can go wait outside. We're like, we don't need to deal with your shit here, Like, there becomes a time where your behavior in the fandom is so shitty that, like, people should reasonably stop listening to you, stop engaging with you. If you're being an asshole in a group of friends, eventually they stop inviting you to stuff,
So do you happen to know what, and maybe it's not Ryan Kennel, do you happen to know what any of these guys that we're lumping together, obviously,
yeah,
do you happen to know what any of them think about, like, what's going on with Snow White post trailer release D23? Like, can you sum up what any of them think about it?
generally my impression, and, like, I'm not going to be able to, obviously generalizing here because I don't have names,
That's
is
fine.
negative.
I'll go with the generalization.
Negative thoughts about Peter Dinklage being in some way responsible for them not hiring dwarf actors. I haven't seen much reactivity to stuff related to Gal Gadot, so I'm going to assume that they're not talking about that very much. And then generally a negative perception of Rachel Zegler for some of the comments that she made about Snow White, which I don't think she's made any new ones. And I, by the way, agree that the comments she made were kind of, like, vapid and meaningless, just in general. And then I hope that they're also just thinking, are we seriously doing another fucking live action remake? Like, I hope that's in everyone's minds, but...
Absolutely. So there's a lot in there. So let's say there are people who are against the Snow White movie with Rachel Zegler because the agenda, again, we'll just go back to woke agenda, gender politics, things like that, right? Gender identity politics, things like that. What if one day you woke up and found out that Ryan Kennel was right?
What would that mean? What would justify him being right, though?
Let's say a hacker leaked into Disney emails Actually, you know what? We don't even have to pretend because there was. It might not apply to Snow White, but again, if we're talking about how people arrive at different conclusions, we've got the gentleman who was caught on tape who's saying that Disney outright was not hiring white men at a particular point. Okay, so let's say somebody sees that video and then applies it to what's going on, right or wrong, Snow White. But let's say we found out through an email leak that Bob Iger demanded that the lead actress, let's say they wanted to go with Margaret Qualley for Snow White. Let's say Margaret Qualley had the best audition, and I understand we're going with a lot of hypotheticals, but I'll get to all
Sure.
of them.
Yeah.
Margaret Qualley was the best actress to audition for Snow White, but because there is an executive who's like, oh, we can't afford to hire a white person right now. It would really go over well if we hired a person of color. Let's say if we found out all of these things and the best actress for the part, on and on and on. I think you get what I'm saying. What if we found out through a leak, whatever, that Ryan Kennel was right? Okay? Would it be fair to say that all that's left is that we just don't like how he comes across in his demeanor and how he attacks certain people?
So okay, so getting to like the specifics of that hypothetical, if that were true, first of all, my thought would be like, generally, as is always the case with Disney, I don't think they believe anything they're saying, and they're just basically, like, basically just doing whatever they think is going to make them money. Even when I think it's fairly disingenuous. But in the context of assuming that that hypothetical is entirely true, it still doesn't change, one, the content of the writing. It still doesn't change the quality of the work itself. And it still doesn't meaningfully create any sort of like anti-white bias in general society in the way that prejudice against minorities in media tends to. Like it's one of those things where it's like, okay, Disney kind of snubbed one person, and like, yeah, like
Okay.
dick move on their part, but
So let's say the critique is it's a good movie, but if we're talking culturally, what does it mean that we have an agenda? This executive has an agenda, and we still critique that. I thought the screenplay was great, but I really think Margaret Qualley could have kept. All right, so let's say that the critique is fair, but they still are attacking the leak that this casting had all of this controversy.
so okay, so I would, depending on the content of somebody criticizing this hypothetical leak, like, yeah, I think there's definitely room for criticism there, but I also think this is a problem that they could have solved, like anti-woke people could have solved back in like 2016, because one of the big reasons why studios still act like it's super impressive or brave or whatever to do things like race swaps or gender swaps or whatever, and they make a performance out of it and everything, is because people get mad about it. So if people responded to that with, "Oh, okay, it seems strange, but whatever,"
But
like,
aren't there movies and shows made that are written, produced, acted by people of color and minorities? Aren't those shows made all the time that don't get the fuss that something like The Acolyte
to
does?
an extent, but not. I mean, not really in a super meaningful way. What I've noticed
I don't agree with that. I
in
fundamentally do not agree with that, by the way.
what I've noticed in engaging with a lot of this content is that when that happens, when there's a fairly diverse cast or whatever that comes out that is really popular, it's almost universally like a show or a movie that is like almost unassailable. Like it's one of those things where it comes out and there's very few angles where you can criticize it, and then okay, now we like it. And you can see that in the context of like Critical Drinker. One of his I think it was Prey. If somebody challenges that in chat, please let me know. But I believe it was Prey. He made a trailer response about why nobody cares about the movie Prey, and then when it turned out they did, he just went back and changed the title of it so it no longer said that nobody cares about it. Like, I think to an extent it's because those things get grandfathered in. Where
But I want to know what you think about it, not what you think of what Critical Drinker thinks about
what
it.
I think about
Because
like
I fundamentally disagree that there aren't projects that have great, diverse, wonderful cast, diverse cast and crew that don't get all of this fuss. So what if we said, or what if we realized this fuss is only when it feels more apparent that studios have these ideas? I think Rogue One is a great example. Rogue One, in my opinion, shut everybody up because of how good it is. It's got the most diverse cast, arguably, at least up until the point that it was made, of any Star Wars project. It stayed true to the nature of the original trilogy, satisfied those fans. It had a female lead. Now, is Jyn Erso like the greatest female lead of all time? No. But at the same time, you know, she doesn't get the types of thumbnails that Daisy Ridley gets when people are, you know, being like that. So, again, when the same people that are accusing these creators of, you know, these inflammatory, we got to make sure that we know everything they've said about everything. And so it just gets lost on me to reiterate the point. I'm new to these people. Like, I'm trying to figure them out too. Like, I learned today. I learned today that Nerdrotic has this thing where he says Peter Parker's Spider-Man, Miles Morales is Miles Morales. Okay. First of all, I fundamentally disagree with that. And it doesn't make any sense that a comic book store owner who's as familiar with comic books as would ever think that. And then the idea that Spider-Man, the whole point is that he could be anybody. It's just not a problem to bring in a, because I mean, how many times have we done that with Robin? It's like,
with who?
That's Robin. Batman
gotcha.
Robin. We've got 4 Robins, 5 Robins, however many we're at now. So it's like that's like a silly thing that I don't agree with, right? But at the same time, if we're acting like these creators have an issue because something is diverse, it's not necessarily true. Because I feel like a lot of these guys like Rogue One based on the content that I've heard from them.
I know what you're saying, and I think that the problem fundamentally with that is the fact that yes, a person can be nice to marginalized people sometimes, but that doesn't change the overall like trend in their behavior. Like a solid example, something.
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they're choosing to be nice to marginalized people. What I'm saying is, if a high-profile studio head or studio has this narrative about them where they feel like they're pushing their agenda, whereas someone over here, what they're asking for is, what do you think it is that people that are anti-woke, what do you think it is that they're asking for? Not to be beat over the head with the agenda and just create great characters and great stories and cast the best actors for them. And if it's a person of color, minority, what have you, and that's all that matters, is that it's story, filmmaking, writing, all that first, correct?
I think that's a thing that they say, but I think actions speak louder than words in terms of their actual like focus in outrage. Well, I wasn't saying literally, oh, they were nice to a marginalized person. What I'm saying is like, okay, yes, they do occasionally like and enjoy media featuring marginalized people, but I don't think that changes that the reasons for their hating of media that also features marginalized people is still based on prejudice. And I think like one, it has to do with things being grandfathered in. Like a sort of example that I've used a fair bit, and something I thought was kind of funny when I was watching your video that came up again, is I made a YouTube video about the Critical Drinker that got responded to by a podcast, and around like 2/3-ish into the video, I made the comment that whenever you ask these people what are strong female characters they like, they always say Ripley from Alien and Sarah Connor. Those are the two that they keep coming back to. And while they were watching it on their podcast, like 5 minutes before I said it in the video, they were like, hey, wait, we're not sexist. We like Ripley from Alien and Sarah Connor from Terminator. And then, you know, same thing came up in your video. Like those were the two examples. And I don't like, there are other ones that exist, but
yeah, of course
those existed like it. the way that they're engaged with seems like kind of a cover, because one, it's like the fact that I can predict it like so consistently that people say it 5 minutes before I say they're gonna say it in my video, and also
But it's
like
almost like
it's
you just don't find that good enough.
no, I
Like
no, I
you're
don't
not,
I don't
you're
find it good
not,
enough.
you're just like, then I don't understand that. Like
What
if someone straight up tells you, here's a female character that I like from a movie that I loved growing up that I grew up with, and because they criticize female characters or studio heads, blah blah blah, for not living up to. That's like if I said we still have not lived up to making a villain as good as Darth Vader. Like it just gets real muddy because then it just seems like you're still just trying to apply um, uh, why am I blanking on the term? It still just seems that you're trying to apply your narrative to them. Well, you still have to be against women because, you know, what you said about Prey. And it's like, no, what if he's making that video about Prey because he's pointing out why this character wasn't written as well as this other character?
well that's not what
It's like all.
I'm not saying
Go ahead.
that the reason that I say it's not good enough is because when you actually engage with the rationality, like the arguments that they're making, they're not simply, oh, I think this character should be written better. It becomes clear very quickly that they don't, like, they have standards that make no sense. An example would be, right, like Echo is a girl boss, and that's just something that we're gonna say, even though we've already told you what girl boss means and it doesn't fit this definition at all. Or Critical Drinker making his video on why women shouldn't win fights with men in movies because it's unrealistic. And it's like, okay, but that's never been the standard. Like, you watch Daredevil and you like Daredevil despite the fact that there's no fucking shot that that guy can beat up 13 dudes in one singular fight, but it's a movie, you know? So if you're like, if your standard, if your suspension of disbelief stops right at women winning fights, you probably just have a bias against women. It doesn't mean that you can't ever like women in movies or that there can't be exceptions to that, but your bias is very clearly in that direction.
Well, then all I would say is make your video about why said character is actually great and why she isn't a girl boss, and then post it on the internet. And if you think people can be convinced from your video, then why is that not good enough?
But I mean, don't you think that it's disingenuous to even open with that? Like if I were to come up with
But how do you know? We're doing a lot of hypotheticals, but how do you truly know every time these guys, how do you truly know that they don't think what they're saying?
well, I don't
Because
so
I don't believe that.
I don't necessarily think that it's always the case. Like what I've said, my impression of a lot of these people, and I'm like willing to be proven wrong on this, or not necessarily even proven wrong because a lot of it's subjective, is like they probably generally speaking have a lot of these beliefs and are playing them up for the camera for, you know, views and stuff. And I think you can see that pretty clearly in some of the stuff that some of them have said. But I'm not saying that like I'm open to the idea that they're just not paying attention, but like after a certain point it's like, why, like I think it's a good idea to be like, hey, this reviewer constantly makes reviews where it seems like he watched the movie blindfolded. Like maybe this isn't the guy that you should be coming and telling me I'm an idiot for not agreeing with, you know? And I think that like we should be disincentivizing that behavior. We should be disincentivizing people who don't pay attention to the movie. Like I think that's dishonesty in its own sense. If you have a consistent pattern of portraying yourself as an objective reviewer and then for all intents and purposes not even like just reading the Wikipedia summary and not even watching the movie, like that's, you're representing yourself dishonestly anyway.
Well, I would argue that objective reviewers, for the most part, are gone. Like if you went back a few decades ago and read, I don't know, when people were more film literate, Ebert and Roper, Siskel and Ebert, the term film critic has changed a lot. And, we can argue whether it's unfortunate or more fortunate that the way of the objective film reviewer, I think it's gone. So instead of going to a .com where it could be anybody reviewing any movie, and even then it gets muddy because it's like, okay, well, does that .com have any ties to a studio or whatever? But when you go to Nerdrotic's channel, you are there to hear Nerdrotic's take on a movie. And what he brings to it, he brings his entire life to it. If you and I can agree that we don't think these people are lying about what they're saying, he brings his entire life experience, whether you like it or not, to that movie review. So his experience, let's say if we're talking about a movie that exists in a franchise, his experience with the franchise, because maybe he existed when it all was released, he remembers certain things, that's going to be completely different than you and I. I guarantee I am not as film literate as somebody like Nerdrotic, just based on the simple fact that he's older than me. He has seen more movies than me, right? That doesn't mean necessarily that my opinions on movies are less valid, because there's a place for what does a millennial say about The Godfather Part 3? Like, I'm the generation that's doing revisionist history on what if this movie's actually good, and and so on. So I think we can just go on and move aside that you and I agree that they aren't being disingenuous.
I don't know if I'm able to agree with that for the sake of argument. I don't know if I would like straight up agree
You
with
would
that.
never be able to prove it.
No, but I think
there's no way for us to know.
But you can't prove any. I mean, even if someone tells you they're lying, you can't prove it literally because they could be lying about that. But I think that you can make pretty strong inductive inferences based on like a pattern of behavior, based on realizing, oh, this take isn't popular, suddenly my opinion switches, or saying stuff that may like if someone outlines a definition of a word for you and then flat out uses the word directly incorrectly, like either they're just not paying attention to what they're doing or they're being disingenuous. And I think that that's like it's one of those things where I'm totally open to the idea that I guess like the only options basically are dishonesty or incompetence. And I don't think in the context of this media space that necessarily even matters all that much. I think there's more evidence on a lot of the dishonesty side of things, but it's like it's one thing. I agree. He's coming to the review space with his own perspectives, with his own life, his own experience with these franchises and everything. But then also, I don't think that that's necessarily like a good thing or a valid defense of that content. I don't think that it's valid then when he makes a video on Doctor Who to point out the races of every character on screen and be like, oh, of course this is a black person, and of course the white man dies in this scene, which is something he literally did in his review of the episode Boom. He opened it to complain about the race of a character in a different episode, and it's like, okay, cool, yeah, he's coming with his own perspective and everything, but like, that's not good. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be going, oh, of course her mom is black. Like, nobody cares. Nobody should care about that.
It's pretty easy to explain this. He comes from a different time than you. And what people just heard me say, and I'm going to kibosh it real quick. He comes from a time that was, less tolerant of people's race and people's gender, blah, 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 blah. Not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, he comes from a time where the culture wasn't obsessed with all of this stuff. So, more than me, more than you, he is a fish out of water in what's going on here. So, probably in a way that I can't even articulate, he sees the corporate bullshit more than we do. Whether it's right or wrong, if you just put it that way, it's pretty you can reason away why he might react to some of this stuff. And then the generation, us, more socially conscious, maybe you're more socially conscious than I am. We're of course going to look at it and be like, this guy's out of his mind. But what I'd be curious to know, because I've seen people react to my comment section saying, like, I've actually followed Nerdrotic for a while, and I get he can get carried away, but I actually remember when this was going on, and it's like a more reasonable take, probably because it's coming from somebody who's trying not to profit off of making a YouTube channel. But it's just not hard to understand that he lived in a time, most of his life, when we all weren't fighting about this stuff. So he's just like, why are we doing this?
I mean, like, I think there's two things there. One of them, like, the reason that people weren't fighting as much about a lot of this stuff, and I mean they were, but it was, more underground, is because racism was just more generally accepted as a mode of being, right? It was just like, it was more common that your daughter comes home with a black boyfriend and you stare her down until she breaks up with him, like that. Those sorts of things were more accepted. But also, like, coming from a different time, coming from a different experience, like, doesn't excuse the way you respond to those things. And I think, like, I watch progressive. Well, I don't think it does, because, like,
if his opinion is that he also remembers a time that was less tolerant of racism, as you just said, if he's looking at it like, I actually, in my daily life, interact with all kinds of different people without a problem, and then I log on to the internet where everybody has a problem, if he remembers that previous life, and even I go throughout my entire day talking to all kinds of different people, and none of this is discussed. But then you get online and it's being discussed, but not even like because we're discussing certain laws in certain states. We're discussing it because Star Wars.
Right, like, but I think that's important because it's
crazy.
It's a component of social development. I mean, if you go back in history, go back to, and to be clear, I'm not accusing these people of being this. I'm just giving an example. You go back to, like, Nazi Germany and stuff. Like, they made propaganda films wherein the point was to be a part of people's media diet that gets them to accept these general ideas. It's not like the whole picture. It's not the whole component or anything, but it's a part of it. And so in the same concept, and to be clear, I am not accusing Nerdrotic of being a Nazi. That's not what I'm saying. When you go and watch
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, okay, cool. But, like, when you go and you watch a Nerdrotic video and he sits down and he opens his review and he says, so there's a white guy in this scene and of course he dies, and there was a black guy or a black woman in the last episode because of course there was. Like, I don't think there's any way of excusing that. He's not even responding to, like, internet stuff. He's literally just seeing a black person and filling in the blanks himself. Like, I can understand someone, and I don't necessarily even always agree with it, but, like, I can understand someone who's older, who came from a different time, like, having a different take on discourse and whatever. But it
is online stuff. It is online stuff he's reacting to, because his movie news is online now. The discourse is online now. Studios react and make decisions based on what people do or don't say online now. It is absolutely based on how people behave on the internet versus the real world.
Well, I agree that those things are related.
Again, that is a significant difference in someone's life who, again, goes through his daily life, it could be said, without any problems at all. But going back to the ultimate point that I've made, is that we become different people. We speak in different voices online, which is, again, what I kind of hope that we would tackle more when it comes to the fandom, because it's because of this loss of empathy and this constant anger that we're always swirling in. It is 100% online, and it's 100% because we have not figured it out. So the only thing that I would say about the Hitler, um, I won't say comparison, I'll say argument, is that going back to words not having any meaning anymore. Now we're in a place where both sides can compare each other to Hitler, and it's like, so did we forget who Hitler was? Like if we could compare the other side to Hitler, both sides can do that. It's like, oh, we've also forgotten like how terrible that man was.
Well, but I mean, both sides
If
can
we're
do that
just
about
constantly
anything.
bringing that up and applying it to other people.
Like anyone can do that about any concept. It's a matter of whether or not it can be like
Yes,
reasonably applied. And I'm to be clear, I'm not comparing Nerdrotic to Hitler in that context. What I'm like,
we're not.
I don't think it's necessarily like, I don't think it's fair to say, oh, both sides can do this, therefore it's unreasonable, or therefore like this is how crazy we've gotten. Because it's like, sure, but like I can say Steve is racist, Steve can say
It,
I'm racist,
it
one of us can be
it
wrong.
means that you're losing a battle. It means that, again, this goes back to what we haven't tackled yet. I feel like we just keep complaining about Nerdrotic, or you want to convince me of something because you're complaining about Nerdrotic. But if we're speaking to how we solve the problem that we both want to solve, it comes down to how we start discerning these things again. And right now, what I've already previously said is that this creator makes a video about something, you don't like it, so I make this video. You point out that this person inspires other people, but so can your other video. So it's like, who's right, who's wrong? You're given more weight, but you can actually give yourself the same weight over here. On and on and on we go. And it's like, I've already said that that's not the way that we should do things if we want to make a change. And I feel like we just keep bringing up instances of, oh, and then that day that person said this thing, and then but wait a minute, that person said that thing on this day. But it's like, okay, all of this can be summed up back to how we are able to discern what people are actually saying versus what they're actually thinking versus, hey, does it really affect me that this person is thinking this? What should I actually maybe side with this person, because ultimately he wants what I want. We want content to be better. We don't want corporations to take advantage of us. It's like that's the kind of stuff I want to get to. But we just kind of keep bringing up these content creators that I know you're passionate about. I'm not saying you're not, but it, it, we're not going to do anything if we just keep complaining about them, because at a certain point, you're only speaking to the people that already agree with you.
Well, I guess okay. So
Or,
yeah,
or you're speaking to the people that will never agree with you. So, what that means is we have to start having the conversation that nobody else is having.
I guess what I'm like, the reason that I'm having this like this concern, or like that I keep coming back to it, it's not really like a Nerdrotic specific thing or any of these individual people. It's more concern about a pattern of behavior. But I guess like what I feel like the reason that it keeps coming back to it is that like
It's your opinion of their behavior.
right, but I mean,
It's your opinion of their behavior,
but I mean
which
opinions.
isn't fair. But if you think Nerdrotic is racist because of line A, I can see that line A and not have a problem with it at all. So you're gonna lose a battle unless you find a different way to communicate.
But I guess what I'm wondering then is like how do we make progress at all? Like how do we how do we handle a situation in which someone is unambiguously engaging in that behavior? Or I guess more to the point, what I brought up earlier, and the reason that I feel like I need to keep coming back to it is like when you have a fandom convention and people are acting like total assholes, and eventually you get say, okay, cool, you guys are kicked out, you leave. Someone like you could come in and say, well, how do you know that they don't think that you're an asshole? Or like, how do you know, like, why are you guys talking past each other or whatever? It's like, okay, but eventually everyone agrees one side is acting like an asshole.
We stick together. So, have you ever if you had I'm assuming you do this often. Do you have people in your life that disagree with you
Oh yeah.
on pop culture topics?
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Have you ever gotten into an argument with them?
Yeah.
Okay. How does that get resolved typically?
Depending on the situation, like the type of disagreement we're having, sometimes it's as simple as um just like, all right, yeah, that's funny, or I disagree, but you know, that's how it is. Um or if it's something more serious, then it ends up being like more of a political discussion or something like that. But like an example recently, my family was talking about the Lorax, which is a movie that I think is very very dumb. I think it's very funny, but I think it's very dumb. And I made some comment to that effect, and they were like, "Well, we watched it recently and we liked it." And I was like, "Oh yeah, to be clear, not trying to take that away from you or anything. I just think it's a very silly movie." And we like had just a little bit of a back and forth about that, and then like that was it. You know, that was the end of the discussion. But I mean, by contrast, like I've had conversations with people where they say something like, "Oh, this is just the MCU happening again," you know, because there is another MCU movie holding a lead female character, and at that point, you can't really end that conversation agreeing to disagree if you both come out with the same opinions you went in with, because it's like, okay, one of those is an opinion that like leads to one, I think, like crappy behavior or cruel treatment of other people in your life, and like two, it's just incorrect. You know, like it's just manipulative.
Your last two sentences lost me because that's not true. It's how you feel, but you can disagree with that person and just find it funny because you don't actually give that person that much weight. It that's like any other time in your life where you think your friend just says something stupid and you laugh and then you move on with your day. It's like that's why people think um that's why people think Trump is funny. Because he comes up with dumb names for people. And it's like they just think it's funny that he came up with the name. That's why he has found success, because not everybody takes insult to Trump just coming up with silly nicknames like Sleepy Joe. But I lost people just because I said the T name, but everybody does that in their lives. They interact with people, whether you can recount it right now or not, but I guarantee in the last week you laughed off something that you disagreed with, and then it didn't matter that that person said it, and then you moved on. And ultimately, that's what we need to figure out how to do all of the time. Because in my opinion, ideally, that is how it should be. Because I question what what's going to be accomplished if you go, hold on, wait a second, and you take it too serious, and then you start getting in somebody's face about why the MCU isn't actually correct, and here's the box office. It's just like that person's just going to be like, what the hell, and then they get defensive, and then your point is lost, and then you end up arguing. It's like it's almost like I don't even want to have a conversation about pop culture opinions. It really can just be figured out if we look at psychology and human behavior. If a friend of mine, this just happened to me recently, a friend of mine chose to make a point, a direct opposing point to me on Twitter, and I didn't take it as well as if he had actually just reached out to me personally. And we started working it out. We were actually talking on the phone, and I asked him, I said, I'm just curious. In general, now that this is behind us, do you think I would have been more receptive to your point if you did it the way that you did it, or if you had just decided to call me in the first place? And he said, call you in the first place. Beautiful. All good. I said, what do you think would have made me more defensive? You tweeting it the way that you did, or just going on and calling me. He said, tweeting it. Beautiful. Perfect. We have solved it. The best way for somebody to get across their point is to do it in a relatable, effective manner, while also giving someone the benefit of the doubt, but also clearly illustrating your points, and then taking time to figure it out amongst yourselves, and then moving on after that. And the best way for the other person to be receptive to what you're saying is to, again, do everything that I've just said. So he might have a great point. Maybe I did something shitty. He has a great point. But just because he's doing it publicly on Twitter, I've got my fists up, and I don't care what he says at that point. I just want to fire back. That is what we're talking about, man.
Okay.
You say the word behavior all the time, and it's just like, we know this kind of stuff through life. But because of online, because we're on these platforms that are meant to be short form, because we are all nameless, because we were all faceless, like, somebody can have the best point in the world, but if I'm just reading it with a default profile picture, a username that's not a first and last name, and it's a book of a comment, I'm already less receptive, even though that person might actually be right, and then it falls upon deaf ears. So why should anybody think that Nerdrotic will change how he goes about something because of videos about him on the internet?
Well, I don't. So
it's
I don't.
Legitimate question.
Okay, so there are a few things that you brought up there. To address like the last thing you said, I think that I kind of explained it a little bit earlier. I don't think that he's going to directly respond to criticism. I think that's pretty unlikely. Obviously, like, it's a thing I'm happy to have those kinds of conversations with him, his fans, like whomever. But I like what I was saying before is I think that disincentivizing the popularity of that content is something that's going to change that behavior. But I think you made a really good example there by bringing up Donald Trump as an example, because Donald Trump is someone you can't have a political conversation with. Like, you can't call him up. There is no version of keeping him off of his defensive, because he just responds with reflexive nicknames and insults and things like that. So for the
you're saying that as somebody who views him from afar through the media, through people who also go after him with certain types of questions. I mean, we could just go on and on about all of the filters that I also see him through, to be fair. I'm not saying that's just how the media works. It's not more or less about Trump. It's just how we take in these things.
Well, I'm not talking about
it
like his personal life.
I'm just saying it comes back to us discerning. Like, I mean, I really just was talking about how he calls Joe Biden Sleepy Joe, and some people just think that's funny.
No, I agree, but I guess like my point is that what Sleepy Joe is, or what MCU is, what Girlboss is, are all thought terminating cliches. They're all ways of getting you to stop thinking about it, because you've already sorted this into a category that doesn't need to be challenged. And so, like, my point when I'm talking about someone like Donald Trump, and I'm not talking about like leftist interviewers or whatever talking to him, I'm talking about like you watch him have an interview with someone he agrees with, or someone who's trying to give him like a puff piece, and you realize like you can't have like a meaningful conversation because he's off in some completely other world. So like you were talking about like calling people out on Twitter, and how like your friend could have handled that situation better. And I mean, obviously, like, part of my concern is that it's like, okay, we're not friends with any of these people. Like, I'm not friends with Nerdrotic or whatever. But part of my concern is also that any amount of criticism is perceived as that personal attack. Really fantastic example of that is that when the Star Wars Twitter account said, hey, the racist insults being thrown at Moses Ingram are bad, and we don't welcome that in our community, something which I think is an uncontrovertibly defensible statement to make, and something where she was literally getting like racial slurs being sent to her and everything like that. All of these people took it as an attack on them. They weren't named, If they weren't the ones calling her racist names, they weren't responsible, but they still were like, oh, look, they're attacking us. Their guard is up, even though they haven't been mentioned. So it's like, how, like, I can't reach out to people like that and be like, hey, can we talk one-on-one? Can we have this, like, conversation and anything? Because no matter what, like, you're already the enemy to people like that. And it makes it impossible.
I would, without knowing how you handle every single little thing, we'd have to, again, we have to think about the fact that, like, you, and by you I mean anybody in general, we see these trigger words and these trigger labels, and we bring our bullshit to all of that stuff. So if we already are like, oh, I'm so tired of people talking about MCU or whatever, I think it's so stupid, blah 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 blah. And the second that you automatically discount every single person who says that term because you're bringing their shit. But what if that's the one person who actually just has reasonable,
well, but that's just it. I don't do that.
Argument.
That's just the thing. I don't intrinsically discount someone for having, like, even if I think that a person has a racist opinion.
In your hypothetical, you did that because Disney could be posting that to discount and push a different narrative. Like, let's just write off the criticisms of this character and this actor. I mean, that's what the fan baiting term is.
Right, but that didn't happen, though. Like, I'm critical of Moses Ingram's character. I'm critical of Riva in that show, but, like, I'm not attacked by that tweet. I can still post about it. I can still talk to all of the people who liked that tweet, who retweeted it, whatever, and be like, yeah, I just don't think she was characterized very well. I don't think her motives were very clear. And I'm never attacked for that. But as soon as someone, like, if someone says, hey, racism is bad, and you've got 70 guys in your replies being like, why are you attacking me? Like, is it just, like, what am I supposed to take from that other than you see criticizing racism as an attack on you?
Because there are people who aren't racist who say that they have a problem with this character and Moses Ingram, right? There are people who say that and voice it out into the world. And somebody else on the internet might actually accuse them of racism because of what they're bringing to the table. Maybe they've already argued with a million other people that are racist towards Moses Ingram. And so these two people meet head to head. This person thinks that person's racist, and this person's being called a racist and defensive, and the conversation and point are lost on both of them. And the problem is, both of you are probably played by Disney, because that person is saying, like, I'm just trying to have a reasonable dialogue, and people over here are calling me racist. And not only are they calling it racist, they're saying that it's irrefutable that I'm racist.
But who's saying
Disney is affirming, and Disney is affirming that they can't bring any of this up without being called racist.
But
Disney
who's saying that and how?
Do a press release on, or there wasn't a news story about how the writing was rushed and they failed certain characters, or, you know, all it was Disney calling out racism.
But I mean, like, who's saying that any criticism of this character is racism? Like, I don't see that anywhere. And I think, like it's literally...
Dude, come on, man. You know, there's no way. We're doing a lot of hypotheticals, and I have a hard time if you aren't going to hypothetically say that there are people on the internet who criticize people of color and minorities online, and because of the times that we're in, that there are people on the other side who refuse to see that because they automatically label people. There's no way that you cannot ride that hypothetical.
When I'm not saying I'm like, it hypothetically could be true. I'm saying I don't see evidence that is some, like, meaningful part of the discourse. There are people, like, there exist individuals on Twitter or whomever who jump the gun. Like, I'm not saying that can't ever happen, but I don't see a consistent pattern of anyone who says, I just don't think Riva was a great character for these reasons in this show, them getting repeated accusations of racism. And I say this as somebody who, like, I despise The Rise of Skywalker as a film. I talk about it all the time. and I don't ever get any sort of pushback on being sexist for hating Rey or being racist for hating Rose Tico or like any of that stuff. My least favorite moment in The Last Jedi, I mean, yeah, I'd have to think about it. Probably is the moment with the not fighting what we hate, saving what we love. I can say that outwardly, and I never get accusations of that stuff. Like it doesn't happen. So when people say, "Oh, I'm getting accused of racism just because I criticize this person," I have to I go back and look at it, and I don't see that actually meaningfully happening.
I don't understand how you can say that, because how are you able to see every single message or comment that they're getting?
No, I'm not saying it never
Maybe they
happens.
say something in a YouTube video and you look across your comments, but you can't see the comments that are hidden. You can't see the private DMs that this person is getting. I mean, you just can't. You can say that you don't see it, but the idea that you should just discount it and not take them at their word is part of the problem. Because really, what you're doing is just conforming it to the narrative that you want to have. If you're already just dismissive of, I don't see it, so therefore it's not true, it's like, okay.
That's not
well
what I'm
then,
saying. I'm not saying that I don't see it, therefore it's not true. I'm saying I don't see evidence of this. And so the consistent reinforcement that it's a it's just this ever-present cultural force seems very disingenuous to me. Like when with the context of like racist DMs being sent to actors, I'm sure not every single one of them has, but several of them have posted those DMs. So I can be like, cool, I know this is happening. I mean, not cool, but you know what I mean. But in the context of somebody being called racist simply for not liking a black character, like I just, whenever they say that, they just say it. Like I've never
so
seen.
how often do you genuinely, I'm just curious, I'll ask, how often do you think you contest someone? Let's say you take issue with somebody, you think this comes across racist. You might not think that they're racist. Maybe you said something, or maybe you thought something they said it was racist, whatever. How often do you seek an explanation? And then once they give an explanation, how willing are you to change your initial idea and premise
When you say
on what that person, where that person was coming from?
seek an explanation of like what they mean about the character or whatever.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I try to do that fairly consistently. I think to the extent like the people who engage with me on Discord and stuff like that, or engage with me in like those private spaces, I think can agree that like when someone posts something that says, "Hey, this person is being racist because they say whatever," and I read through it and I'm like, I think what they're getting at is actually this. Like I think that I very consistently behave in that manner because I don't want to like I'm not trying to levy false accusations here or anything like that.
Right.
And again, like people can jump the gun. I'm not saying that's impossible or whatever. I'm talking about like broad cultural forces, and that's where like I don't see it. Like I watch YouTubers like I don't know, Shay Frillis Productions, who's a really big YouTuber who doesn't like The Last Jedi very much. I don't see people accusing him of being a bigot in his comments or in his comment section because he doesn't engage in bigotry. Like he doesn't, it's not a consistent thing that he gets. Whereas I can see why someone would watch a Nerdrotic video that opens with "this woman is black because of course she's black," and someone being like, "Oh, okay, yeah, of course, of course he's on the racist side of this issue." That's the problem. That's why I think these people have a really obvious easy win that they could get, that they could be getting constantly if every time that this really bad behavior came out, they were like, and not every time, you don't have to talk about every single news story or whatever, but when it comes out, they're like, "This behavior is unacceptable. I disagree with the writing of this character, but I do not agree with these people. This isn't okay. This is not what our community stands for." And if that were a consistent pattern of behavior, then I wouldn't be coming at them in the same way. I wouldn't, whatever. But if every time someone says racism is bad and they're like, "Oh wow, we're being attacked," eventually after the 75th time that someone's done that, you're like, "Okay, wait, do you just like racism? What's the why does that feel like an attack to you?"
First of all, it's a good quality that you have. If you truly can question somebody or accuse somebody and then hear them out and then are willing to change your opinion, that is a good quality to have. Do you think that most people do that?
No, but I don't think most people do that in like any context in life. And I guess I shouldn't say most people. I think most people don't do it regularly. I think everyone does it every once in a while. Um, but I also don't like I don't see evidence of the narrative happening regardless. Like, yeah, sure, I don't trust the average random, lefty on Twitter to have like perfect takes on all of this stuff. I'm not suggesting that, but I don't see a constant pattern of people saying disliking this character is inherently racist. Like, it's just not a thing that I see at all. And so when someone says, "Oh, this is what's happening," I'm like, "Where? Like, can you show me where as a consistent pattern of behavior this is happening?" Because I feel like I'm coming.
I think we. I don't think that's wild to me that you're saying that. I'm not saying that it does or doesn't happen to you or anything, but the idea that there aren't people that are accused of being racist or criticizing someone of color, I mean, it's just.
But again, I'm not
It's
saying that
just
they
no
don't
way that that's
exist.
not true.
I'm not saying that it's literal.
Okay.
I'm talking about like a broader cultural pattern. That's the thing that
So
I'm
for
concerned
you,
about.
gotcha. So for you to operate under the assumption or to not change anything, because, well, I don't see it, so this is where this conversation just goes in circles, man.
But I'm not saying that.
Because we just keep bringing it back to complaining about the type of content that these people make, and I just like I just don't know what else to say or do when it comes down to like we talk a little bit about how we behave with each other online, but ultimately we blame it on the creator. It's like, why are we blaming it on the creator? I can choose to not get offended by something. I can choose to further research and spend time to see if this person actually believes this. I can spend my time elsewhere completely. It all starts here.
Right, but we don't. But like we don't exist. I mean, to use a quote from Kamala Harris, like, "You think you fell out of a coconut tree?" Like, no, we all exist in the context of each other, and the actions of other people do still affect our lives. And I keep coming back to the example of like people being an asshole at Comic-Con, because it's like, okay, yeah, you can choose to not be offended by the group of guys, making snide comments every time you walk by, or being like, make basically just making a fuss, being obnoxious. Like, sure, you can choose not to be annoyed, choose not to be offended by it or whatever, but it doesn't change the fact that like they're behaving in an inappropriate manner, and that like,
According to you.
right. But I mean,
What's inappropriate if we're all relaxed on what the other person is doing?
but I mean, like, at that point,
Who
can
do,
we
who
make
do you
any
want
of?
to be when you go see a stand-up comedian, right? When you go see a stand-up comedian, if you get offended by a joke, but someone else can just laugh it off with the understanding that it's funny because it's a joke and that this person isn't saying something that they actually mean or shouldn't be taken serious, wouldn't you rather be the unbothered person?
I mean, it depends on the context
If
of the
there are two
situation.
outcomes, if there are two outcomes in any situation, somebody says something, I am in charge of how I react to it. Why wouldn't you choose the more objective, reasonable approach?
Because I care.
Or the approach that is able to laugh it off?
Because I care about the well-being of people younger and less equipped to deal with that stuff than I am. I care about, like, in the context, depending on the joke that's made, like, it may be quote unquote offensive, but like, I think it's fine. I don't think it's bad. But in terms of like bad, like, prejudiced behavior, people being cruel at Comic-Con or being a disruption or whatever, my number one reason that I'm concerned about that is because there are people younger and less equipped to deal with this than me that are going to have that shape their perception of the world. There are going to be young people who go and like, there exist, just factually speaking, young people who go and watch a YouTube video from someone in this sphere, hear them complaining about women just very broadly, and come away with it thinking, oh, I guess like I'm just not welcome here. And I think that's fucked up, and I think that that's one of the reasons why we can't, like, I can't do this whole, like, I can't necessarily directly and super friendly communicate with people in this sphere until it becomes unambiguously the case that everyone, every demographic is welcome and their concerns are valid.
copy and paste your reasoning word for word, and then paste it to me saying those people, those younger people, would be better off with my approach. If you and I, start talking to each other about how younger people need to critically think and discern why somebody is saying something, where they're coming from when they say it, how it makes you feel, how you control how you feel, that is going to be what makes the younger generation do better mentally, because it's going to get worse. You and I would probably be okay if we deleted one or two social media accounts tomorrow. Whereas right now, there's a 13-year-old who's looking at their phone and seeing the type of people angry at each other going back and forth. And let's keep in mind, there are bigger issues. I'm going to be honest. I tried to zoom out with this conversation. There are bigger issues than what Nerdrotic thinks about the casting choices of Rings of Power.
Well, yeah, but I'm not saying it's the biggest.
We are on the brink of World War III. Like, none of this should actually matter, but because I do agree with you that there are bigger things to think about, like how people will respond to this in the future. Yes, I agree. I worry about how younger people I'm worried about how they're going to interact. What I'm saying is, my reasoning is what we should be discussing, because it kind of got lost in the last point that you made was hypocritical.
Are you talking about the younger people?
The very last line you said, and I kind of forgot what it was, and that's my fault because I'm rambling. But there was a direct hypocritical contradiction in your last point about why you are pushing forward with your.
Are you talking about with respect to like all demographics being welcome? When I said that?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I come from the perspective. So I have I did one of my undergrad degrees in sociology. So it's sitting. I've got a diploma somewhere back there, and like I can agree in the very broad like hypotheticals that yeah, you're right that young people and kids would be better off if they could just laugh off every possible insult and whatever. But the reality is the behavior of people surrounding you, especially as a child, still shape your perspective of the social world. They still shape the way that you engage with yourself. And so in the context of like when we talk about things like representation or whatever, when you're, and it's not 100%, but broadly speaking, when you're a young black kid and every single main character in every single franchise that is playing in theaters, all year long is a white person, you do come away with that, with the general impression that in some way that role is not for you. And so in the same way, when you're a young person, and whether we like it or not, and I wish that this were different, young people are on the internet, when they go and they see some of the most popular people in these spaces basically making that argument for those movies, it psychologically changes their perception of the world and of what they're allowed to be. And you can say like, oh, well, just be like rational, logical all you want, but like that's just not how the human brain works. Like we're not at a point yet where we can just like turn off socialization,
And we kind of touched on this earlier in the conversation, but kids are obviously influenced by everyone around them, especially adults. That's exactly why we should be, again, spending time. I mean, I have the same point. And a kid now gets to, thankfully, grow up with all kinds of characters to relate to, probably more than ever. And so the idea that there's a kid growing up right now who may or may not see themselves on screen, I would say that that's probably less likely than ever. Doesn't mean that there's not work to be done. Doesn't mean that it couldn't be improved. I would say that that is less likely than ever. But I would say if people keep speaking the way that you just spoke about needing to spend more energy on those kids, then those kids are going to think that. It goes back to, the conversation we had at the top, is that there can be a child from the LGBTQ plus community who hears a homophobic joke and sees a YouTube channel that talks about why that's homophobic and hurtful and why that person's the devil, or they can see the YouTube channel from another member of that same community who laughs it off. So what we're debating here is that you just keep circling back to why only one of those exists, or why that's the only way to go about something.
But I'm not. I feel like
I reject that entirely.
I feel like you keep coming back to this idea that we're like calling them the devil or evil or anything of that sphere, and I don't.
You're like, if you feel like someone has behaved beyond your standard to the point where you feel like why are you correcting people?
Because I think that I value truth. I don't know.
But who are you? I don't know you. So right. How, not only do you have to convince the world that who you're speaking to is bad, you have to convince the world why I should listen to you.
Well, I'm not trying to convince the world that the person I'm speaking to is bad necessarily. Like, I don't care. You can come away with it from whatever.
If you spend time correcting people's behavior because you're coming from a place of, this is why I think your behavior shouldn't be, like,
should be disincentivized. Yeah, I think that's like, I don't think that's in any way, I don't think that's a fundamental.
Your point falls on deaf ears when there are people who can take something completely differently than you. If you were calling out behavior, we literally could just debate on every single thing that Nerdrotic. We could just have a list of things that Nerdrotic has said, and you will have not convinced me of anything because I've already just been like, yeah, man, I took that as a joke. And then you're like, but this behavior is abhorrent and shouldn't be supported. It's like, I don't see it as behavior. I see it as him trying to be funny, and then I didn't think of it again. And then I still had the, like, it's the self-righteousness and self-importance that I believe that you want to do good and put good out into the world. But it's almost like I think you're just focusing on the wrong things.
I don't necessarily think that that's like true. I focus on a variety of different things, and sometimes it's this, completely other unrelated thing. Sometimes I make videos on why, XYZ like news story is falsely reported, which I think is a good thing to do. Sometimes I make videos like basically making a case for why I think that this story is better than its source material or whatever. Like, it's like super broad range of things, but I don't think like what I'm getting at here is, yes, people can come away from the same thing with different interpretations, but sometimes those interpretations aren't valid. I think you would agree that Jesse Lee Peterson is wrong in saying that slavery wasn't racist, right? It doesn't matter that he's a black man. It doesn't matter that he has a different perspective. He's just wrong, like, just factually speaking, incorrect. And so in the same sense, and I'm not even really talking about jokes. I have my own problem with the jokes that Nerdrotic makes. I think it's fucked up to Photoshop pictures of real women with cum on their faces and things like that. Like, I think that's a disgusting thing to do. But, like, ignoring the jokes for a second, like, just the objective, like, stated points that are being made are where I think it's just valid to, like, just to correct them. I'm not saying, like, I'm not coming here from the perspective of I'm a superior person to Gary Nerdrotic or whatever. Like, I'm not coming from that perspective. I'm coming from, okay, in this microcosm, in this small situation, this person is incorrect about a thing, and here is how. In the exact same way that he makes a video where he says this movie is bad because of these facts. Both of them are media. Both of us are making corrections. And after a certain point, it's up to, like, critical thinking to determine, okay, which one is actually making good points? Which one is actually making arguments? Like, I think, Chad has a point here. Bob saying, like, fighting back against bullies is just as bad as being a bully. Like, it's not, right? It's there's a difference between telling a bully to go F themselves and being a bully yourself. And that's like that's the problem that I'm running into. I'm not saying that he's evil. I'm not saying he's a demon or, the devil or anything like that. I'm saying this behavior is morally wrong and it should be corrected. And I'm not necessarily better. There could be shitty things that I'm doing in my life, and someone is valid to criticize me. If they're private, they should probably be private, but if it's public, it can be public. But it doesn't change, like my points are right or wrong irrespective of who I am.
First of all, I can't see the chat. He said that fighting back against the bully is not bullying. Is that what you said?
They say basically they were characterizing your argument as basically being fighting back against bullies is just as bad as being a bully. Like they're just reducing it down to that kind of idea.
Well, no, I agree with the person who wrote that, but then it's like, okay, but how many ways are there to fight against the bully? So if we're applying, I don't think that metaphor is perfect, and the only reason why I don't is because I think our conversation is wildly unfocused, because again, I keep wanting to talk about what I thought we were going to talk about, which is how to fix fandom. And right now we're just fighting over complaining about other creators.
Well, but I don't think I think that's a relevant, I think that's a relevant piece of the puzzle when 30% of fandom is that. Like that's,
But I've kind of already given you my opinion on how we just handle it.
Right, but I guess I disagree. I don't think that just ignoring it or just laughing it off is that, that's the point that I'm trying to get at, is that I don't think that the reason that you've given actually works in the real world. I think that's why we're still on it. It's not because it's not because it's the only thing worth talking about. It's because I don't think that the argument works.
You don't think that based on your based on the idea that you take hold of something that somebody says, and you don't think that you give that more importance sometimes because of your particular stance, or maybe not even your stance or opinion? Because I don't have a problem with you making videos, stating your opinion, but if we're trying to solve how people interact with each other online and with the fandom, both sides are guilty of it.
But
so it goes back to how we approach everything, and it's why the hypotheticals that we're throwing out are wildly unfocused, because maybe we're hypothetically speaking too much or generalizing too much. I'm not trying to say at all that I disagree with I'm not trying to discount that there are bullies. Absolutely there are bullies online. But what is a bully? I would say, what is a bully online versus what is a bully in person? Because a bully in person might physically hurt you. A bully in person might give you fear in your daily life. But it's like that Tyler the Creator meme, where it's like, what is online bullying if you can shut your laptop? And what I think that means is, again, you control how you take this stuff in.
But that's not really that's not a functional solution to the problem, because if what is bullying online, if you can close your laptop, ultimately means, if you actually extrapolate that and use that in the real world, it means if you're a marginalized person with opinions these people disagree with, you can't be online. Or you get to be bullied or you get to log off. Those are your options. And that's why it's
there are people in marginalized communities, quote unquote, that don't agree with you.
Yeah, and I would disagree with that.
The reason why I say how?
Well, I would disagree. I would say that when it comes to being a marginalized person on the internet, generally speaking, your options, if you disagree with the people in this general sphere we've talked about, your options.
Is there such a thing as a marginalized person on the internet?
What? Is there no? Yeah. I mean, a black person with a
Oh, you're
YouTube account.
saying marginalized person, comma, on the internet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm saying right, and I'm
Sorry.
saying that like your options are, I mean, you've got basically three options. Or we'll say four. So you've got like languish and obscurity, like just nobody pays attention to you, which is fine for whatever. Be bullied on the internet and just have to deal with that constantly. Close your comments so that only people who agree with you can comment, or you log off. Right? Those are your options. Being a marginalized person using the internet, that's what the logic of just log off means. It was why that controversy when that streamer who had she was playing, I don't remember what game it was, Valorant or whatever, and there was a guy threatening to rape her in the comments or in the voice chat or whatever. It's like, yeah, sure, she can log off, but what that means ultimately is that she just can't use voice chat. So basically, like, it ends up meaning that, okay, fine, yeah, log off. That just means that women can't use voice chat, and like, cool, that's it. And that's why it's like, it's really frustrating. It's like, okay, yeah, telling someone to log off is cool in an individual situation, but as a broad like social pattern, being a marginalized person who uses the internet is being at a fundamental disadvantage in the way that you're treated.
There are people who are treated poorly on the internet. There's no doubt about it. But again, that's that's where we go back to this idea that we're all labeling and name calling each other, right? And the internet is just not, we are not able to communicate effectively on the internet, which is why that's what I want to speak to. But the idea that you present, I have a hard time. It's not that I think what you're saying is wrong or evil necessarily. It's that you're just not including that there are people in these groups that just don't agree with you. So what I hear when you say, "Well, I just don't agree with them," but it's like, wait a minute. There are people that are minorities. There are women, there are people in the LGBTQ plus community who don't give a shit about woke content. There are also members of those communities that don't think we have a problem at all. So again,
Right, but I
that's
mean,
what circles back to the idea of what if we just look at what we're doing on an individual basis? If there's a little girl who can't be on voice chat because there are grown men all the time, why aren't we looking at what the gaming companies are excuse me, doing on those platforms?
exactly.
Why aren't we just
Yeah.
talking about why aren't we just talking about what parents are allowing their kids to do? Because that's where it starts, man. And that's why you and I should start trying to figure out how people can do this themselves. Because that's where it starts. It's not ever going to start. I'm not saying, I hear your passion. I don't have a problem with it. It's not like I think like these ideas are terrible. A lot of them are idealistic. They fall apart because once you start to saying, I have to call this out, it falls on deaf ears because
But I like so
we have approached this wrong all of these years, and that's why we're here.
but
Twitter was created in 2009, and because the people that got Twitter weren't equipped to use Twitter, that's why we're at where we're at. So it's only going to start to reverse if we stop pointing the finger and stop accusing and stop blaming each other, whether that person is cruel, whether that person is right or wrong, because we've got to bring empathy back.
but I'm not saying that we shouldn't be empathetic in the context of a marginalized person who disagrees with me, say another LGBT person who disagrees with me about this. Like, I'm happy to have an empathetic and sincere conversation with them and everything. I'm happy to have an empathetic and sincere conversation with almost any of these people, short of like some of the really like vile whatever. But what I'm like, the concern that I'm getting at here is that it feels like ultimately it's on the people being bullied, the people being mistreated, to make the bullies' lives better or to help them when like it feels like you're basically
it's about intelligently being like, how can it's psychology, how can I actually manipulate? It goes back to the analogy I brought up about how you're able to reason with someone you're disagreeing with in your real life. How can I psychologically get someone to hear me? How can I psychologically convince somebody to be more receptive of the point I want to make? So it's like being at a party, and maybe you're very passionate about uh, a certain charity or something, or supporting a marginalized group or whatever, and you're with a friend that makes an insensitive joke at a party, right? But you don't say anything to them right there in that moment. Otherwise, they'd be on the defense because it's a social setting. There are other people that can see this interaction. That person could be more susceptible to you if you go get a burger after that party and you're like, hey man, I just kind of want to tell you how I'm feeling about this, like blah 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 blah. So there could be another person at that party who walked away thinking your friend was a racist and a bigot, like, I have to call this out, this is the behavior that I find abhorrent or whatever. And your point would your point to your friend over the burger about how you were disappointed in this and this is what this might have happened when you said this, it's like that person is going to be receptive to you in the moment. What's going to happen is that other person decides, I'm going to make a YouTube video about this person and call this person out, and then that person's probably going to be on the defensive again.
Okay, so I think that's a good example because it highlights a little bit of the difference in the psychology of one-to-one individual engagement versus online engagement. So one of the really common patterns, and I think one of the reasons why people hold a lot of these opinions that I have a problem with, is because they're under the general impression that they're the popular ones, that they're the silent majority or whatever. I think that's one of the reasons why it's easy to not have to feel like you're challenged by it. So psychologically, one of the ways to get people to be more receptive is to when you're someone who disagrees with them, voice that disagreement. If you go on the internet and you see, because the algorithm incentivizes particularly inflammatory and reactionary content, and you see, wow, all of these popular YouTubers are super anti-woke or whatever, like, cool, everyone must agree with me, then you're probably more likely to be stuck in that mindset and in that way of thinking. But if you go on there and you see, actually, it's about 50-50, you're a lot more receptive to be like, okay, there are a lot of people that think I'm wrong. I should probably go check that out. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, the goal when you're making YouTube content on an individual person or whatever is probably not to change their mind. It's to change their viewer's mind. Like, that's just kind of how, like, disagreement works on the internet, right? You bring your buddy out there for burgers to have a chat about their racist comment or whatever. That's a very personal thing. But if you're engaging with a person online who lives maybe across the world from you, you're probably more trying to engage with people who agree with them. So they're not being personally attacked. They're not necessarily on the defensive. And having...
Well, that just tells... Basically, I would just say, yeah, it takes more work. And that's why I think naturally we're less susceptible to do it. It takes a lot of work to empathize with people online that are doing things that you might not agree with. It takes a lot of energy to change, and you know this with your background. You know how much energy it takes to change someone's mind. That's why I just don't understand why you keep landing back on that it just needs to come from a call out in a YouTube video.
Well, but I mean, do you disagree that psychologically it is likely, or a person is more likely to be open-minded if they perceive there to be a lot of disagreement to them, like, as opposed to perceiving everyone as agreeing with them? Or I guess, like, if that's not clear phrasing, one of the things that a lot of like super extreme churches like to do is say that everyone secretly believes the same thing we believe and they're just hiding it. And so as a result of that, like, those people just kind of generically assume that they're the most popular thing. Their beliefs are the most popular. So would you agree then that that person is going to be more likely to question themselves when they realize, oh, no, people do sincerely disagree with me?
No. If I understand your question correctly, let me just elaborate just to make sure I understand. But Um, there's a member of that church who says that way, speaks that way. They find out there are a lot of other people in society that disagree with them. Am I on the same page?
Yes.
Okay, and they find out that all those people in society accuse them of being wrong, right?
Sure. Sure. Or I would say accuse their
That
pastor of being wrong. Accuse their pastor, not them. Accuse their pastor of being wrong.
I do not believe that the person involved in the church changes their mind because of that.
Well, I'm not saying that they changed their mind because of that, but I don't think. Let's see. How do I? Okay, let's imagine just like a hypothetical situation, and I'm not saying this is like a. I'm saying I think this is probably just a good way of like broadly thinking about it. Imagine you've got a bookstore, and every single day you go and you pick up a book from that bookstore on, say, Roman history, on how Roman history was really great and fantastic and amazing. And so your entire life, you're just under the impression that everybody thinks that. And then one day you go to that bookstore and you say they've added a whole new section on the problems with Roman history and on the reasons why there are all of these flaws with it. Would you agree then that that person is more likely to start thinking, oh, maybe my thinking was a little bit too short-sighted. Maybe there's more out there that I'm missing.
No, I don't think that's how it goes. Not just with that. I think it. I mean, if I can put it simply, I think it takes a hell of amount of energy to change someone's way of thinking, especially when you consider what age they are, what time of life they're at. Um, like, so I grew up Roman Catholic. I was like a church boy growing up all my life. I went to private Catholic school. And then when I was kind of starting to teeter in eighth grade, but once I got to high school and public school, and I just took in all kinds of different information, and I think this goes along with what you're getting at. Um, I think it speaks to a time I had in my life. Um, Once I started taking in like every other opposition, I started to realize um, that there are other ways to live. So in that particular instance, I think it was the fact that I was more susceptible and the fact that my entire environment was completely different and I was surrounded by an entire different community. I don't think, I think I arrive at your point, but again, with that metaphor, it's like, well, but um, I was susceptible to changing my beliefs because I was young and I was thrown in. I was a fish out of water, right? So, but what that also taught me is that I guess it's the reason why I am the way that I am. It taught me that there are so many different types of ways of thinking, and that it's really not, again, a matter of they didn't intend on changing my mind. That's the other thing too. You have to think about intent. It kind of happened on accident, but what I learned over time is how to be able to talk to different people. Because what happened is I was a very defensive and scared young man. And that was a really weird thing for me to experience. And that actually made me very judgmental against what other people believed. I was very judgmental because it was instantly one of those things where it's like, oh, I just realized that my entire life, and I'm speaking to how I felt at the time,
Sure.
not so much now. But at the time, it was like, oh, my entire life has been a lie, or I have a completely different. I'm looking back at everything I thought I knew, and I don't understand the world anymore. I don't understand my moralities. I don't understand the ground, like where I plant my feet, and that also made it. I was very judgmental of other people because then it was like, well, I have to think that what I'm doing now has purpose and what I think and feel is right, and everyone else is just lost, just like I was. I'm the only one that made it out. Everyone else is just lost in their own bullshit. I got out of this trap before everybody else did because I changed my way of thinking super young, and everyone else around me is just kind of the way that they've always been. There's just a lot of that. So, but I grew into uh, thinking the way that I think now, having gone through multiple sort of transformations, if you will. It's where do I put importance? Where do I finally just admit? When do I decide to take comfort that other people's decisions don't need to be criticized or judged? When and how can I understand and talk to someone that I don't necessarily believe everything? It's like all of these things came up through that type of transformation. So I appreciate the metaphor, but I think ultimately what's lost is that um, we're stuck in echo chambers. Let's say I was in an echo chamber from K through 8, right? And I was able to break out of my echo chamber because they said, "Here you go. Here's public school." That's not where we're at anymore. We we are in echo chambers. To go back to the other point you made, we're in echo chambers online and on social media, and it's almost like I'm saying my approach and my way of coming to this conversation, my solution to this is like literally the way to break out of an echo chamber or to dismantle an echo chamber.
But I mean, doesn't that mean then that it's true that engaging with people who disagree with you just in general is something that's going to make you more likely to question yourself? Like, because that's the point that I'm making, right? I'm obviously not in an echo chamber here because I spend some of my time anyway engaging with the media of people I disagree with and explaining why I disagree with it. So I'm coming over here, I'm like, okay, here I am in this open forum, this non-echo chamber, trying to make more and more content leading people to this non-echo chambered area where we can actually converse.
If I think that this is where I think the conversation is unfocused because I think we've already decided that an approved way or a fine way to communicate is just by voicing your own opinion. That is fine. Making videos about, this is why this character isn't a girl boss, all that kind of stuff is totally good. What when I'm pushing back up against when I say that I'm worried about looking inward, it's because there are people who don't know how to communicate with each other. There are people who aren't just making the video and letting people figure it out. There are people who are just screaming and yelling at each other and saying hateful things, even when they don't mean them. So we're just constantly kind of going in an unfocused circle and having multiple conversations.
So I agree that it's unfocused. I think part of that is at least a result of the fact that like I don't do conversations like this very often, so I'm still getting used to like focusing things. So that's something I'm just gonna like take from it and look back and be like, okay, how can I better, the like stuff that I wrote up didn't necessarily always factor in. That's just figuring that out. But yeah, I guess like what my ideal version of this whole fandom situation, whatever, is that anybody from any like background, demographic, or whatever can come into these forums, can have conversations about things, can like or dislike stuff, understand like context, right? If somebody's saying, The Acolyte is my favorite show in the world, you probably don't need to be telling them actually it sucks, right? Because that's not the time and the place, whatever. But be able to have those sorts of conversations and be not be I guess dissuaded based off of their demographic characteristics. Like that's, at least for me, like that's the biggest rift, the thing that needs to be healed, and that's what I'm looking for a solution to, is how
it, it's not that that isn't admirable, and you might already succeed at that. But if so, but are we talking about fandom? Because I wouldn't say that that's what is going on in fandom.
well, I think it is fandom, because I'm talking like um when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about whether it's discussing media that we like or dislike, whether it's playing video games together, like those sorts of things. What I see and I hear a lot is, okay, marginalized people come out here and they say, I'm being bullied because of whatever status that I have. I'm being bullied for being gay. I'm being bullied for being a woman, whatever. And then the solution they're told is, okay, just log off. And so what that ends up creating is an environment where if you are a person, a victim of bullying, and you call that out, you're just like, you're told that the problem is you and you need to get out of this situation. And so like, I would rather, like, we're talking about looking inward, right? I would rather the people who are engaging in that bullying, or the people who are sanitizing it in some way, to look inward and be like, okay, is this an acceptable way for us to be treating somebody? Is it an acceptable environment to have where our default response to a black person saying that they've been called racial slurs is telling them to log off? Like, is that where we want to be as a collective of fans of whatever? Or do we want to be in a place where like nobody feels like they're being bullied, so they don't have to voice it?
Okay, when I said people can log off, I wasn't saying that that's a solution to a black boy being bullied and that that's all he should get from somebody. I said it is good and beneficial for everyone to learn how to have a proper understanding of how to handle things online. But if you want to apply my log off example to a black boy being bullied, the bully is in the wrong.
Cool. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I just want to make sure that we're doing this, because we can't change hypotheticals and change what we meant in the moment when we said things like that.
To be clear, I'm not saying that you think that the person is in the right. What I feel like, based off of the conversation that we've had, is that you think that they're just not really like an important part of the discussion, or that like the solution to
I think our reaction to them can give them more weight. Because when you are raising a child, and to the person in the chat who spoke about bullying, are you a parent?
I am not, no.
I am not either. But I believe that when I have a child, I believe that they will be bullied. I just think it's something that you have to prepare for, and it's an unfortunate aspect of life. I was bullied growing up, like it just happens. And my approach to that, if and when I have a child, is to prepare that child as much as possible for bullying. And that is my solution.
And I think that's definitely a good part of it, right? That's something that my mother did when I was young and I was being bullied in school, when I had people who were mistreating me in a variety of different ways. But she also like called up the teacher and said, something needs to be done about this behavior, right? It's a twofold approach. I totally agree with like encouraging people to have better, healthier responses to things that they're being told online and, mistreatment that they're experiencing. But nonetheless, I think that it's also important for whomever is, running the platform, or whoever is successful, or to engage with the bully and do whatever they can to change that behavior. Sometimes it's disincentivizing it, right? In certain cases, right, somebody posting a bunch of racial slurs on Twitter, having replies disabled on their account, like, sure, that's cool, like, fine. then it's not as fun to bully people and it doesn't end up happening as much. But like as a community, we need to be like, okay, hey, this school is forming a bunch of cliques that are starting to treat kids in this group really poorly. Maybe we should do something to address the fact that they're forming these cliques and do something to change that. On top of recommending and teaching like better, healthier responses, because that's a big thing that I care about, whether it's with my siblings or whether it's with potential like hypothetical future kids or friends or whomever, is encouraging like, hey, understand that one, people saying this don't necessarily mean it. What they're doing is inappropriate. They're probably sad themselves. Like, you know, talk them through the whole thing, get them to understand, think rationally about what's going on. But like, I don't want to stop there. You know, that feels like prioritizing negative peace over positive justice, you know, to use a charged MLK quote.
This is just where we are proving ineffective. If we want to pivot and have a conversation about what's going on with kids and being online, fine. But it changes when you take things that I've said, when we talk about how we respond to Nerdrotic online, and then you're like, well, how does that work when we talk about kids being bullied? I can't keep doing this, man. It's like these are good talking points, but we haven't had them separately, and we're carrying points that we've made into the next conversation.
Well, to be clear, that's why I'm bringing it up. Like, I'm asking you, like, I'm trying to bounce this off of you. I'm not trying to say, hey, you said this earlier in this other context, therefore you mean this really bad thing. I'm not making these really wild accusations or anything. I'm literally like, okay, so if we apply your logic,
I feel like yeah. It's not that I feel like I'm being accused of saying bullying is real or anything, but it's like it's just twisting everything that we've talked about, and I just don't.
I mean, is there something that you feel like has been represented inaccurately?
Well, no, it's just that there are obviously different approaches every time we talk about, like, all right, well, what if we talk about the bullied kid, and then what if we talk about like how, you know, somebody decides to take down a creator that they seemingly accuse as being racist when that person is not. It's like these are all different conversations, man.
And I think like there are differences to them, but I think ultimately they end up being the same broad conversation. Like, I think that, for instance,
I think you want them to be.
Well, but it's not.
There might be some realization, or I'm sorry, there might be some relation to it, but I don't. I think I might, and if there is, I might just be getting lost. But I mean,
I guess I'm saying, like, I think there are a lot of like fundamental categorical similarities that are making this a relevant and apt comparison. So, for instance, like, I think we can agree, like, if we were taking down the list of like types of bullying, a person DMing a kid to call them a racial slur or whatever is like on the more extreme end of bullying without getting like violent or anything. But then like a person posting a tweet where they're saying a bunch of racial slurs and just generally broadly applying them, okay, well, that's not necessarily as targeted, but you can see how that's still right, that still creates the same general environment as the targeted prejudice. And so we go a step further and we're like, okay, somebody who is saying prejudiced things, not necessarily using slurs or whatever, is helping to foster the same general environment that the person directly bullying is engaging in. So that's why I think it's like, it's a relevant comparison, because it's like, okay, is Nerdrotic personally DMing a black kid to call them the N-word? No, and I'm not accusing him of that or anything of that sort, but I am saying that a black kid going online and watching his review of an episode of Doctor Who where he says, oh, of course this person's black, is fostering the same basic environment that person is going to be experiencing, or that they're fostering the same basic environment that leads to that sort of prejudiced behavior, that leads to that person watching it being made to feel small, being made to feel less than simply for their race or simply for their gender or their sexuality or whatever. And so that's why I think it's a relevant comparison, because it's like, okay, you can just tell them to stop watching Nerdrotic videos, and that's like that's cool and all, but at the end of the day, like, you're basically just setting up a situation where people of these communities are not welcome in certain spaces on the internet. Like, sorry, you commenting on a nerdrotic video is just gonna be met with mistreatment, and like, sorry, I guess you just can't do that. And it's like, well, what the hell's the deal with that? Like, why is that our, like, why is that generally the societal solution? I'm not saying that that's your solution, but like why is that the environment we're fostering, rather than taking a look at the source and being like, okay, why is YouTube incentivizing this content? Why is the algorithm repeatedly recommending prejudice? Why is it that there are so many communities of people who enjoy that kind of content? Is that something that we can address? You know, I think a good like example is laughing at jokes about race versus like racist jokes, right? There are people who have made, like, comedians who have made jokes that I think you could just like unambiguously agree are flat out just racist. Like, not like you take them seriously, you take it as a joke regardless, like it's just, it is prejudice. A good example I think you'd probably agree with is like minstrel shows, right? Like you'd agree that that's racism, right?
What was it? I'm sorry.
Minstrel shows, like when they would, you know, do shoe shine and do like black stereotypes and stuff like that. Right. Okay. So you would agree, like, fundamentally, like, regardless of any sort of taking it as a joke versus taking it seriously, that is racism. So a person who laughs at that, who sees that show and thinks it's fucking hilarious and is enjoying that, can potentially have their experience or their perception reframed over, like, throughout conversation, throughout discourse, things like that, to the point where they no longer find it funny. Like, there are jokes and behaviors that I used to enjoy that I no longer enjoy, and I think that we can do work to make it so that that stuff just isn't enjoyable. Sometimes that's by highlighting the truth of it. Sometimes that's by like literally coming out here and being like, hey, that was a real actress that you just photoshopped doing a sex act. What the fuck is the deal with that? Why do you find that funny? And I think that sometimes like people even just directly being called on that are like, oh shit, yeah, what the fuck was I thinking with that? But sometimes it's more nuanced. Sometimes it's looking into the rationality and, you know, debunking the points line by line. Sometimes it's by having personal conversations. I don't think that any one singular approach is the only way to solve it. I'm not saying that making YouTube videos, debunking critical drinker videos is like the solution to everything. I don't even remotely think that, but I think it can be a part of it. And that's what I'm getting at. Ultimately getting to the point where you, being a marginalized person engaging with the internet, don't have to be made to feel less than simply for being marginalized. I know that was a lot, sorry.
I think that you weave in a lot to make all these points. So I'm going to try to simplify my stance on everything you just said. Children need to be protected from the world in a way that I don't.
Yep.
I am in charge of my life. So these are different conversations. What also should happen is a child needs to be educated on as much as possible about what they may or may not encounter in the world. Okay?
Yeah, agreed.
So the fact that you are coming from a place of like, hey, if a kid can watch a nerdrotic video and be let down, I'd like to make a video that will uplift them. That is an admirable thing to do. And it's also why I say that, I mean, I've already stated, that's what you should do. Like, if you just have a different viewpoint than nerdrotic, make it about your viewpoint and make it about your stance if you want to do that. And that's fine. But at the same time, with your premise, you were operating under the assumption, if you're bringing in kids, you're operating under the assumption that what? Are those parents not able to educate their kids? The kid needs your video to counteract nerdrotic's video?
No,
it's like, that's where this kind of stuff is like, let's just keep bringing in all this fluff to make me sound like this is as important as possible.
But that's not what I'm not saying that. I'm not saying
that's just what I hear though. It's just like it's not that it's not admirable, but it's almost like I'm looking at it from a place where like you're just you're disagreeing with the fact that my whole stance is self-work. My whole stance is communication and self-improvement. And it's just weird for you to bounce off of it and make those kind of points. So I don't know if it's just because we've left that conversation, but that's just what it feels like. It just feels like I'm like, if we're here to talk about how fandom can improve, well, let's just think about how we talk about each other. But what about the black boy who was marginalized against the? It's like, wait a minute. That actually, first of all, that might actually still help. But at the same time, it's like it's just a lot. There's a lot going on.
What I'm saying though is like you say your perspective is the self-improvement and self-work, and I'm saying yes, and other things that should be done to minimize some of these negative effects. So like when I'm talking about like
but everything else I've also kind of addressed counteracts what you're saying. We're just swimming in circles, I think.
I guess I don't know. Like I think in the like you talk about engaging with
there are people that you're not going to change their mind.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
They come from a completely different viewpoint. So it's like, okay, how do we work within that system? Here's how the real world works. Everybody has different background, different religion, different thought. They were raised differently, different levels of education, blah, 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 blah. Where do we start? Empathy. Giving people the benefit of the doubt. If I want to effectively communicate with my person, I have to have the equal amount of understanding as to where they're coming from. That's where there's a huge problem. We're not doing that. We don't do that. There are people who call each other racist, blah, 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 all the time. That may or may not be racist. All these words of blasphemy. We've already figured that out. But
okay, I think I have like two kind of.
There's step one.
So I agree with you in that empathy is a really important part of this discussion and an important thing to have for people when you're engaging in discourse. I think I have two sort of examples that I think are worth bringing up here that are both just things that ended up making their way into videos of mine. One of them was I was commenting on the fact that when Geeks and Gamers was doing a trailer reaction to the Fallout trailer when it like first came out, his entire commentary was just watching every time a brown person came on screen, he screamed diversity, diversity, diversity. And so I made a video where I talked about that. And I said at the end, I said, Jeremy, like I'm speaking to you directly. I understand that you probably don't being assigned this label, but this is why people like, here are the reasons why people are assigning it to you. And here's what you can do to shake it. Here's how you can change it. And I think as far as I can tell, like that's basically engaging with this empathetically. That is coming to it from the perspective of, okay, I understand that you're having these feelings. I understand why this might be frustrating to you. Here's why I think it's fair and why you can do something better to fix it. And my second point, and I can bring both of these back up if if I've talked about too much, but is like you also kind of need to demand empathy from some of these people. Like when you watch, I watched a podcast including Nerdrotic, The Critical Drinker, a couple of other people in that sort of sphere, where they were talking about an actor in one of the new Doctor Who episodes and kept referring to her as a thing. Like they were like, oh, and of course RTD wanted to hire this thing. It was disgusting seeing this thing prancing around. And like you have to look at that.
I mean, it's just uncalled for. It's just gross.
Right, exactly. So I think that you can come at it from the perspective of, okay, that's not cool. That behavior is unacceptable. Like I don't need to necessarily sit down with you and be like, hey, do you understand why this is hurtful? Like, why it's hurtful. No, let's not beat around the bush. But then also when we're talking about the broad general things where this person isn't isn't directly personally attacking a real human being with feelings and everything, we can be empathetic. We can say, here's why you're called that. Here's where this label's coming from. Here is the standard that I'm using to apply it, and here's what I think you can do to fix it. And like, it's not as much empathy as you can get talking directly, but like, I think that's about as much as you can get when you're making YouTube content, right? Which like, obviously I wouldn't expect Nerdrotic or Gary or or Jeremy or whomever to talk to every person who disagrees with them, right? So like, after a certain point, you can be empathetic while also, while also being, a sincere critic. I think a really good example of that was Jose's video on The Critical Drinker. I think that was a really good kind of breakdown that was also really empathetic, and I think hopefully did a lot of good work on that front.
Okay. So maybe in simplest terms, what we just fundamentally disagree on is that we've got people that can't relate to each other. We got people that can't relate to, or I'm sorry, relate or communicate with each other, right? Um, it's almost like you approach it. We solve this by pointing out the reasons why we can't get along, and I solve it to where that shouldn't be our starting point. We start first, and first of all, I agree with you. The other side needs to have empathy as well. That's why, in my approach, I believe the way that you go about it is the easiest way to gain empathy from the other person. Like, I just fundamentally disagree. Like you said, we demand empathy from the other side. I don't believe you are asking for empathy in the most effective way by what you're doing. I think you ask for empathy by going about it my way, which is start where you relate to this person the most first and finding the common ground. We can go big or small with this, but it could be as small as, hey, you and I both like Whataburger. Let's go to Whataburger and talk this out. Or it can be, you know what? That person ultimately just wants to see a movie studio be held to a standard, creating a product. And you know what's funny? If Nerdrotic and Critical Drinker aren't liars, then what they want is what the other side wants. If they truly mean we don't care about diversity, all we care about are good storytelling, good writing, care for these franchises, care for the characters, no cash grabs, don't worry about a sequel until we're all of this stuff that we talk about all the time. They'll get what they want too, because there are still great actors that belong to all different types of communities that will earn, whether it be a spot on the crew, spot on the cast, whatever. They'll get what they deserve, and then everybody will be happy. Because I don't think we're at a point where we're gonna stop being diverse. I don't think it's just not gonna happen.
I mean, here's hoping.
But what we can sift through is the unproductive noise and disagreements. So that's where I'm at. I think it might take us a lot to get to this area, but I think we ultimately agree. And I love this. I think empathy is wildly important. I think it's important in I don't know, maybe every facet of life.
Yeah,
I really do.
Yeah.
I think that I ask for empathy for the people that might not just be great, might not be great at getting their point across. There are people who ask for empathy to uplift marginalized groups, and those are admirable things that I will never argue against. The fact that isn't a problem to certain communities. I just struggle with your solution is really it. And I just want to make sure that that's clear, because there are a lot of people watching right now that have no idea who I am. So I just want to make sure we get to something as that focused and that where we find common ground.
Oh god, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm big on a lot of the empathy train. There's some stuff that I disagreed with that was said there that I think it might just be like unproductive to keep like going back to now, like just because we've been having the same sort of conversation. So it might be like, okay, one of those things where it's like come back to it some other time or whatever. um it's actually like really funny having conversations about empathy for anyone who doesn't know, and this is not something that I can actually get money for at this point in time, so like I'm more just saying this out of interest. The name of my book that I'm hoping to publish by the end of the year is called The Empath, and it's like all about empathy, so it's just a really funny, like, it keeps getting brought up and I'm like, oh my god, it's the thing. But I don't know, I guess like I value one of the things. I think this is probably something that we can agree on pretty easily. One of the things that I would really value out of the side of the fandom that I clearly seem to have the most, like, take the most issue with or whatever, is more willingness to have these sorts of conversations. I have some very strong opinions and disagreements and stuff like that, and I sincerely would love to have like chats with not necessarily the big people, like I'm, it's not like a clout thing or whatever, but like would love to talk to more people. I appreciate you coming on for that reason alone. Because I mean, at the very least, like, you're bouncing ideas, you're getting a better impression of where people are coming from, which I think is something that everyone can do with. I think like the average person just isn't spending their time like learning everything about every content creator they agree or agree or disagree with. But
I mean, but I think that's kind of why. Yeah, I think that's kind of why though you need to um, just take inventory of everything that you're seeing. It's like there are people who see my thumbnails, for instance, right? So the thumbnails that you have up on screen are, in particular, like the yellow and red. That is a design that I arrived at because the first time I did that, a video took off, right? So I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this a few more times. It ended up, from what I can tell, working, right? So the intention is, what everybody on YouTube's trying to figure out, what's the thumbnail that, personally, I am very passionate about design and graphic design, right? So it's like, how can I do something that I think looks good, looks professional, looks like a channel that people would watch and doesn't look amateurish, at the same time catches eyeballs, also just to be transparent. How can I put my spin on a clickbaity title, right? So if you're looking at your screen right now,
sure,
you've got my version of my title that I think grabs eyeballs the most. What I also have is Gary from Nerdrotic's face. So the idea that like somebody, and actually this did happen to me. I posted a video talking about, I think you referenced it. I posted a video about the Rotten Tomatoes thing, right? Rotten Tomatoes changing the score, right? And a gentleman online included my thumbnail with other people, and he was railing against videos that proclaimed that there was a conspiracy on Disney changing the title, right? My thumbnail, if anybody watches my video, and you know this, thankfully, and thank you for watching it, you know that it's very likely that I didn't side with I definitely didn't side with his point, but I also didn't side with a lot of the creators that were included in what he lumped me in. On the surface, you see, what's Rewatch Ryan doing? He is a nerdrotic apologizer or whatever. If you watch the video, I mean, we've had a good conversation. We've interacted. Do you think it's easy to describe me as a nerdrotic apologist?
I don't
like out of your opinion. I'm genuinely wondering.
I don't think based on the context of what I've heard you say that you like, I wouldn't characterize you as someone who's I mean, the word they always use is like shilling or whatever. Like, I wouldn't characterize you that way at all. I do think that based off of some of the points that were made, I think that they sort of serve to sanitize one side of the conversation a little bit. That's one thing. Like when we're talking about, the behavior of Grayson in that Twitter thread, right? To, and getting emotional and things like that or whatever. Okay, like that's fair for a thing to discuss, and I think that, it's totally reasonable to say, hey, maybe it's not super healthy to be making super emotional Twitter threads. But I also think, like, without the context of the fact that, like, okay, yeah, Nerdrotic is somebody who calls human beings objects, and yells, like, I think it's one of those things where it's like critical thinking does require more information, and I think
I,
that's
I think that you're about to wrap up, so I apologize. But I actually wish that this is where we started. I think it would have been beneficial to just you and I, but also to our audience, to sort of make sure that we understand fully where we're coming from. Because again, like, this is one of the very first times that I've hopped on, like you, talking to someone who's on an opposing view, right? I am a guest on your show. I appreciate you. A lot of people are watching me for the first time, and I just want to make sure that, everything, that we just take care of how we differ and how we can still find common ground. I think that's ultimately the entire point of this. So to make sure that we do that, like, I understand everything that you just said. Um, and that's why I appreciate the conversation. What I would just add to that is that if you actually watch my videos, especially, again, I just straight up told everyone I'm not even that familiar with this person. But at the same time, I think if you watch my video, uh, you can discern. Hopefully, not everybody does. You can discern that it's coming from a different place, and it's not just as easy as creation sucks. Neurotic needs to be protected, because other creators have done that, and that's fine. But I think um, all of this was brought up to say that that's what happens if you actually take the extra bit of time to assess and discern. Is that it's not as easy as looking at my thumbnails and being like, this guy's a neurotic shill, because I don't speak to things that I don't know about. I've had people that accuse me of, like, pandering and things like that. Um, Accuse me of pandering and accuse me of being a shill or whatever, but it's like, and then they'll tell me things that about Nerdrotic that I should have included in my video, because they're the reasons why they don't like them, or come from where they're coming from. But it's like, that's fine, but I don't think that changes my video. So, I've had people stress, like, I've discounted his criminal past and things like that. And it's like, well, first of all, I'm not going to act like I know anything about it. But second of all, when they complain about it, they also tell me that he's been to prison. So it's like, wait, so you're telling me that I should have changed my entire viewpoint because he did this terrible thing at one point in his life, but you also just told me he served his time for it. You also told me he's been punished by it. And then you also were like, this person then had enough time to make himself on a YouTube channel, but I should have only focused on the bad thing, and that's the reason why the other side automatically wins. It's like,
no, I can definitely see your frustration there. I think one of the something that might help in bridging that communication, that frustration there, because I understand where somebody's coming from with that. Not necessarily with the prison stuff. I don't know a crazy amount of details about it, and I don't want to, like, crazy speculate.
and I don't either. I don't
Yeah,
either.
yeah, yeah. But what I think, like, somebody who's watching, at least the podcast appearance one, someone who's watching your video on that. Actually, let's mention the botted one, because I think that's actually, it's a more easy objective example. Is the way that, like, time is spent in the video does influence people's perceptions. Like, an example would be if you are covering two people fighting over something, and you say, okay, both of them are equally bad, but then you dedicate the entire video to going over why one of them is bad, then even though you said that at the beginning, like, you still create the perception that there's a bigger problem with this other person. So I think, like, in the context of
Who did I say was bad in that video?
so I'm gonna give, in the context of the botted video, one of the things that I felt like was a little bit frustrating about your coverage of it was that you are correct in saying that it's not proven and that it's not 100% clear exactly what's going on here, but in treating this article like it's in taking this article entirely seriously and going through it in a way that's basically just kind of like platforming the contents of the article without really like meaningful pushback in areas that I think you should have given pushback, it does create the perception that it's still at least like a little bit of a legitimate article. When I think that it's like it's not difficult to read that article and utterly dismantle it like without even looking at any other content, you know, like without even fact checking their claims. I think you can like already see how it's incredibly biased coverage. So I think it's like it's one of those things where if you come into a conversation like assuming good faith and you read an article from say I don't know, MSNBC and then an article from Breitbart and you treat those two with like equal what's the word, like importance or relevance or whatever, then after a certain point, like you're kind of giving a little bit of like false legitimacy to the Breitbart article, if that makes sense. That's not like some super like angry like lefty rage critique or whatever. It's just one of those things that I think is worth considering. Is like, okay, do I trust this source, and is like, should I be saying more to question the contents of this source?
No, I mean, I just think that, well, first of all, I removed one of the details that was provided in that article. I removed entirely because I didn't think there was any weight there. But I just feel like I left it open on purpose at the end of the video. And I certainly didn't, just in case anybody's wondering, I certainly didn't, I'm not coming from the place where I think Grayson had anything to do with it. I don't.
Oh, yeah. That, not trying to accuse that for sure.
Ultimately, what I'm speculating ultimately is that, first of all, I think it's at this point we just know that this engagement farming is going on. I mean, I don't know how prevalent it is in online fandom space and what Disney's doing behind all that kind of shit. But I know that it's just a part of, again, what's going on with the social media algorithms and echo chambers, just showing people what they want to see and what they is proven to engage with. Obviously, people are engaging with high profile controversies and flash things like that. But we could go on, but those are sort of just obvious things that are going on right now. But yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, I feel like the idea of the video was to be open-ended. I mean, the title in and of itself is a question. And then I, in the video, removed the detail of it. I'm honestly forgetting the detail that I completely rendered
was it the TikTok
useless
or
in my argument. Yeah. It had to do with the previous TikTok. That's right. Yeah, that's not.
Yeah, no, I definitely like I see what you're getting at there. The reason that I think there was sort of a concern in the way that was covered is because it kind of like there's this idea online that anyone can kind of levy any accusation and then anyone can just cover that accusation like it's a possible truth. And so in the case of that article, like one of the things that I think was really worth noting, that article said, I believe the exact quote was, private accounts on Twitter are very rare. That right there was like, to me, a red flag in that like they never gave a percentage. They never gave a ballpark percentage. They just said very rare and like allowed you to fill in the blanks. So I did a little bit of research on that. Right. And I was looking at like polls, and polls suggest that approximately, and again, this source could also be called into question, but approximately 20% of people have public accounts, approximately 20% of people have private accounts, and then the remaining 60% either have multiple accounts that are both public and private, or don't know, which suggests that there is when they say very rare, you're thinking, oh, it's going to be this incredible statistical improbability. But when you look at the data, it seems like it's actually not that unlikely. So they're suggesting something nefarious going on without actually substantiating it and like expecting you to fill in the blanks. And so I think like reading that article and just kind of reading it and playing it straight can be frustrating to someone who's noticing that and being like, hey, wait a minute, that right there should tip you off that this person isn't coming at it objectively. The person who wrote the article,
I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know.
I think that, but I do, I agree. I think at the same time though, I think it's understood generally that's still a possibility no matter what. As far as just how the algorithm handled the reaction to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's possible. I'm not saying that. Obviously, what you said is a good point to consider, and it probably makes it less likely. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, I'm on board with that. I don't take any issue with that.
Yeah, that's one of those things where like I at least coming at it from the outside because people are mad online and everything like that. I'm trying to like cut through and be like, okay, I think this is probably the thing that people have a concern with. Um, so this is just trying to kind of address. Good grief, ooh, voice crack. Just trying to kind of like address like where I think some of that criticism comes from, and sort of I guess like a really simple objective example of what someone might consider to be apologism or whatever is sometimes that context or whatever being missed, even if it's unintentional, can sort of start to give an impression. People can form an opinion to an extent, right? What you say is almost as is not the only it's not the only thing, right? It's also important like what you don't say, right? And so I think that's just something that people like, that's just a worthwhile thing that I think anyone can take into consideration is, okay, what information could possibly be missing here? What am I giving more time to one side of this than the other? Is that fair? Because maybe it is, right? If someone makes a viral Twitter thread accusing some random person of being a serial killer, you probably don't need to give them a ton of time. Like they're probably BSing, whatever. So like just trying to like evaluate that, I think is something that people like if you get that criticism, I think that's where it might be coming from. Is having a problem with like a portioning of time or a portioning of where critical thinking gets applied or things like that. I don't know if that
Right.
made
Yeah.
sense, but
But no, I do. I mean, I'm also just thinking about um, some other things too. I mean, again, it's just the idea that somebody I feel like just wanted to argue, just brought their shit to it. Like, this is why I hate him because he used to do this bad thing, and it's like, but that isn't relevant to the point of my video. Like,
yeah, I don't know, that like that person could be totally out of whack. I don't know. Like I
well,
could be with
it's.
you.
I mean, that's again, but that just goes back to our stuff on the internet. It's like everybody's just wearing their shit all the time, and I just I hope that um I hope sincerely that people just are able to. I just wish that it was only about finding a release when it comes to taking in content, whether it be YouTube video, turning on a YouTube video just to laugh or to just to learn, watching a movie to be entertained. Like it kind of goes back to that idea where like people are always saying, let's get messaging out of movies, and it's like that's where I learned a lot about life, is
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. Like that's the entire point. Like there's absolutely, again, there are criticisms about agendas and people doing this for this reasons. Is it genuine? Is it to make money? There's all of that stuff. But at the same time, there are movies that fly under the radar of all of that controversy, and I've always learned a lot about storytelling. And in fact, this is actually something that upset some people too. I think the main reason it upset people is because Elon Musk tweeted it. But the general idea is that he posted a picture. I actually think I saw other accounts post this as well. It's not like it was his post, but
I think I know.
just the
Yeah.
idea. Do you know what I'm talking about? So it's essentially the idea that the question that he's posing is, um, how do we cheer for rebels against the resistance in film and television, and but we don't know it when we see it in real life. And I've always thought about that, and I've also just thought about how it's changed for me along my life. Like I saw Fight Club at a super impressionable time in my life when I was young, and it contributed to what I spoke about before when I was young. Sort of like it opened up the world to me. And what I took away from Fight Club at my young age at that time was everything I thought like had meaning doesn't. And so that's where I became angry and apathetic and um, all of these things. And now when I watch it, I see sort of a warning about masculinity, which is
Mm-hmm.
funny because that's something that people saw when it came out, but you have to bring in like how old was the person that saw it versus how old
Mm-hmm.
was I when I saw it, things like that. So I had to like grow into um to that idea because I applied it to my own shit. And so I've always just been fascinated about that. Like how I can watch the same thing somebody else can and then just take something else. But it's like if you just take what I just said, um, it's fascinating to me. It's not something I want to be angry about anymore.
Yeah.
I
No.
want I want I empathy, learning from people like, oh, like this person lives their life this way because they take these lessons and vice versa. And how do we grow because of it? How do we speak to each other because of it? And so, anyway, in the spirit of ending this on this topic and ending it on a positive note, that is ultimately what I want people who watch this video to take away from anything that I've said.
Yeah, totally. I know that somebody's gonna ask me about it if I don't say it. So I would probably just comment that like I think the reason why people said that in response to Elon Musk is just because he's like the richest man on the planet. So it's like he's not really the resistance exactly. That's just I know somebody's gonna ask me about that if I don't. But other than
No, no,
that,
I'm not.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not.
I'm not. Okay.
I'm not attacking.
But,
It's
no, no, no. But you just did what the people that were triggered by it did, which is like I I said that something was fascinating to me and like retweeted a picture, and then all anybody could think about was that Elon Musk was the tweeter of the picture, and it's like so you're just taking away the value in the picture just because of the person who like forgive me, but you kind of just did exactly what the people did
when
that
I
were
don't. I
triggered by
think
it. It's
I
like
think you're missing something there. I'm not taking away the value of the content of the picture. I'm more addressing. Okay, here's why people have this critique, and then here's how
I'm
we can
not.
examine like here's how we
It's
can. Because I broadly speaking, I mean, I wish they picked different franchises, but like I broadly speaking agree with the contents of what that's saying. And I like discussing it. I was more just commenting on I think that's where
yeah.
people are coming from. I'm not
No, I know that. I know that, but it's just annoying. like this is the thing, guys, and then they get distracted by the person who tweeted. It's like, guys, I don't even follow this person. Like, I don't follow Elon Musk. I saw a thing in my for you, and I liked
sure.
what it said about storytelling, and then I'm just like, guys, just like look at the picture. Like, who cares who tweeted it? God. But like that's the thing, man. Is like that's what I want people to like they just wanted to talk to me about why they don't like Elon Musk. And it's like not what we're doing, man. Like that's what people need to relax and stop being so triggered by. It's like it's okay. Like we're talking about stories. We're talking about how they apply to people's life. Like you bringing all your baggage about Elon Musk to me is not what we need to do. I'm not here to argue with you what you think about it. Anyway, I mean that's an example of what I'm speaking to, and so like the fact that like, and I'm not upset with you, but like I just think it's sad that we had to stop and do that. That's all. I
I
just think it's sad that we had to do
I
that
guess
because people
I just come at it from the perspective of like addressing like okay, here's a
because
like
people are
here's
going to
like
hold you to that.
well no more just coming from the perspective of like okay, this is a relevant piece of context to the situation, but then like moving forward
Okay.
here's our yeah. I'm not trying
Okay.
to make it all about Elon Musk or anything because I've seen that posted by so many people before and not had that response. So it was literally like that was more just like a side comment. I'm not trying to make it all about him. Because
Well, I just vented and I apologize.
you're all good. I feel you. I understand why it can be frustrating. And yeah, to your point about Fight Club, and talking about things like, warnings about stuff. Like, I am so in love with the fact that media can examine and discuss different like messages and ideas and whatnot. And I think, like, to the extent that people have a legitimate grievance with messaging in media, because I think it does exist. I just think it's overstated in a lot of ways. Is insincerity in that messaging, is when you've got like a writer or realistically it's probably a producer or a like studio executive who clearly doesn't give a shit about the issue that they're talking about and are just like trying to make the most money out of it. And I think that's kind of its own conversation, but that's just something that I think is worth thinking about when we're talking about stuff like Fight Club. Is one of, I think, the greatest satires I've ever seen in my life. I've watched it like twice in the last month. Another really good one, because we've just like common ground. I feel like I have to talk about this movie. Is Ex Machina is a fantastic critique of also kind of masculinity in a certain sense, right? It's that relationship that he builds with the AI, but treating her more as a woman or a prospective mate than an individual person in and of herself. And I think that's such a cool, that's such a great examination. And I love that that's a thing that we can do. And it's something that I love to talk about. I don't know. I appreciate you talking about Fight Club and stuff. Like, I don't know.
Are you needing to hop off here, or do you want to wrap it up?
I probably should just get some stuff taken care of. My brother's called me 3 times.
No, that's fine. I'm at least glad we kind of just got to chat.
Yeah, no, totally.
For a second.
I was gonna say though, and I'm happy to give you a chance to outro and everything as well. Not to hold you to anything here, but you are welcome to come chat anytime, or feel like we have conversations in the future. That's always something that I'm open to. I appreciate you coming on anyway. I'm just I'm grateful to have the opportunity.
Yeah, I respect, first of all, how you went about just reaching out to me to begin with. I'm not gonna lie, I was surprised, but I was super grateful. And so I just want to say I respect what you got going on here, and the fact that you reached out and that we were able to do this. I guess this is like one of the first podcasts that I've like appeared on to be able to like talk about this kind of stuff. So you were my first, and so I'll give you props to that. So I appreciate you. And look, man, it's like ultimately whether we decide it's unfocused or whether we decide somebody was right about something, whatever it is, it's like the entire point was this conversation, right? At the end of the day, the fact that this is a starting point, the fact that we were able to do this, it's the entire point, and I think ultimately common ground. It's what we want for the space and for other people. And so anyway, thanks for your time, and I appreciate you.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Did you want me to outro?
Yeah, I was going to make one final note real fast, and that's just to make it like unambiguously clear, saying this now, you are obviously free to use any of this footage or whatever. Like, if you need a download or like if you want to talk about it, like, that's 100% welcome. All I ask is that it's edited honestly. I think that's fair. But yeah, just making that clear. I feel like it's important that people know that. But yeah, give us your outro. We can find you in the description.
Yeah. You've been staring at my ridiculous YouTube channel this whole time. So if you want to start a dialogue here, I've been on the internet for a while, but so much of it was done under a corporate umbrella, and just this is me, and this is what I want to do. I welcome everybody and their opinions, and I just want to talk. I just want to be constructive and productive and seek information and learn from each other, but ultimately have fun talking about movies. So, believe it or not, I'm going to do your silly movie reviews and rankings and stuff. It's just been, I'll talk to you about that on my channel. Yeah. And then, of course, I've got a podcast called Movie Mode with Austin Burke, esteemed YouTube critic, and or I'm sorry, esteemed film critic, excuse me, that you can also find on YouTube. But we just started up a podcast, just your classic run-of-the-mill movie review podcast, topical news, things like that. So check out Movie Mode. I appreciate you. Same goes for there. We welcome everybody and want to chat with you and have some fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, have a good one.
You too.
Alrighty, I believe I am still audible. Uh, how do we feel about me in that? How'd I do? I don't know if anyone's in chat anymore, but definitely not something I have a crazy amount of experience with. You bastards, you've abandoned me. Or maybe not, maybe there's a lag. Yeah, I'll give it a second and then we'll end stream. But thanks to everyone who stuck around the whole time. Goddamn, that was 3 hours and 40 minutes. All right, cool. Sounds like we'll. Oh wow, never mind. Wait, it's really behind. No one. Oh wait, that's because it's way behind. Never mind. I'm stupid. This is just gonna all be caught as footage.